So, I've technically had a podcast playlist on this channel for a good while now, but haven't had any dedicated podcasts in that playlist, apart from like one or two in the mix there, but it's generally things that are discussions, but not actually dedicated podcasts, so how about we go ahead and change that and actually try making some dedicated podcasts around here, because that sounds cool and fun, and there's all kinds of topics that we can talk about, like the topic that this Saint Nerd is bringing in today, about reviews on
Yes,
them
sir.
video games.
Yes, sir. So the thing I really want to talk to you about today, Harmonia, is something. I mean, originally I just wanted to have a discussion, but you were like, "Nah, we got to make this a podcast." I'm like, okay, okay.
Because that
It's
sounds
about.
fun.
Well, it does sound pretty cool. It's about the idea of giving a number or assigning a number to a game, to like determine how good it is. Like IGN will say, "Oh, this game's 9 out of 10," or a YouTuber might say, "This game's 3 out of 10," or whatever.
Or
And
IGN might say my favorite game of all time is a 4.9 out of 10.
is that what they said? That
Yeah.
See, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is like assigning a number to a game has kind of fallen out of favor over the years.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to talk about why and why I think it's still worth it to do, but I can understand why people don't like it.
Mhm. And everyone's gonna
So
have like a very different stance as well, and that's something worth considering.
yeah, because like a number sort of implies that this is the objective thing that it is, but there
Mhm.
can't be an objective thing. It's going to be a bunch of different opinions.
Mhm.
So to start with, the question I've been wanting to ask for a minute now, what do you actually think about scores on games? Do you think it's like something we should keep doing, or it's kind of unnecessary, or is it just something that's here to stay in the background? What do you think?
I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons why they've caught on as much as they are is because time is limited. People want to just go in and find out like how good a game is, like just like that. Most people aren't going to have like the time to tune into something like a several hour long video essay like I do, for example. Like if somebody asked me, is Pokemon Legends Arceus a good game? I'll tell them, it's not that simple. There's a lot of ground to cover here. There's a lot of things to discuss. But,
Yes.
with the modern age of information and so much out there at your fingertips, it feels like there's so much information overload that you just kind of want to get someone's opinion on it just like that without, sitting down and discussing things with them for several hours on end. They just want the answer there. So I feel like the biggest reason why review scores are as big as they are is for the sake of convenience. Like, there's your answer. That's how good it is, like answer received, instead of something like my video essays where I never even give a score at the end, because I feel like it doesn't properly encompass the whole thing in a meaningful way. But for the sake of convenience, it's something that we continue to use, is the way that I see it. And
No, I agree
I will
with that.
continue to see them.
Yeah, I think we'll continue to see them, and I think we kind of should. Partially for that reason, yeah, because it's literally so convenient. You don't want to sit down and watch 3 hours of a review. You just want to be like, all right, is this game good or not?
Mhm.
And they'll say, okay, it's a 7 out of 10. But the thing is, me just giving the game a number of 7 out of 10, that doesn't really answer your question if it's good or not. Because like you said, it's a little more complicated.
Mhm.
The thing that made me think of this was Mario Sunshine, right?
Mhm.
And Mario Sunshine, I think that game's like a 7 out of 10.
Mhm.
And a 7 out of 10, you might consider that, oh, that's good. I think if you say 7 out of 10 to me, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, the game is good. I'm going to go play it and hopefully enjoy it. But Sunshine has a lot of things it does really well and a lot of things it does horribly.
Yeah.
I just think all that comes together to make a 7 out of 10, but that doesn't mean it's a solidly good game necessarily.
Mhm.
So the problem with numbers is they don't really have any nuance. It's just a static thing.
And it's also important to consider what is your frame of reference for this scale, and people are going to define that differently. Like, is 10 out of 10 perfect? There's no flaws to the game whatsoever, no problems to be had, which is no game I think I've ever played. And is like
That's
1 out
actually
of 10.
something.
Yeah.
That's actually something I wanted to ask you. What do you consider a perfect or a 10? Like, what warrants a 10 for a game?
That's this feels existential. No, because no, I don't know about that, but it's the kind of thing where I don't think I've ever played a game that I would define as perfect, that had no flaws, that had no issues that I take with it. I take issues with like every game I've ever played. Some will have more issues than others, but there isn't a single game I've ever played where I don't have some sort of issue with it. So if I was going from that perspective, I would say that no game I've played is 10 out of 10, but because, you know, no game I've played would reach that, I have to make some compromises and say, okay, just really, really, really good is 10 out of 10 in that case, rather than it being, like, absolute perfection. Like, something that I'd constitute as, like, a masterpiece I might put as 10 out of 10. Something that I think is, like, absolutely amazing, but has, you know, some flaws, I'd probably put as, like, a 9 out of 10. Something that I'd probably put as, like, a 9 out of 10 would be, like, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, whereas 10 out of 10, I'd probably say Xenoblade 1 and 2. 8 out of 10, I'd probably be like, alright, yeah, it's a really good game. 7 out of 10 is like, alright, yeah, that's good, that's solid. 6 would be like, yeah, it's alright, there's things going for it here. And 5 and lower is where things get a little bit sketchy there. But a lot of people will face it differently as well. Like, a lot of people, I feel like the general way that a lot of people look at it is like, 10 out of 10 is masterpiece, 9 out of 10 is really good, 8 is good, 7's eh, 6 is bad, is the way that is the way that a lot of people look at it, and that's a big issue there.
That's something I really disagree with too, because I pretty much agree with the way you said things. To me, a 10 is perfect, a 9 is excellent, 8 is really good, 7 is a solid good game, 6 is okay, and 5 is like neutral. It has as much good as bad, and then everything below 5 is negative. It's bad.
Getting into real bad territory there. But yeah, like, and it also depends on, like, you know, just the way that big platformers will handle themselves in terms of their reviews. Like, take Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, for example. IGN dropped a 6 out of 10 when it came to that game, which, you know, if you're looking at, like, 1 is the worst and 10 is perfect, and, like, it's at 60% of the way to perfection, it's like, okay, that's still pretty good. But the way that people will look at a 6 out of 10 will be like, wow, IGN rated this game really poorly, you know, like that.
Yeah, and I think part of that is why people don't value numbers so much, is because IGN gives so many games a 9 or an 8 all the time. Like, every other game is a 9 or an 8. So when they actually give something a 7, it's like, oh wait, this game was actually bad enough to make them think about it. This game must be horrible.
Yeah.
So, and I think that style of doing things from IGN is kind of permeated into other gaming networks and, like, news outlets.
Yeah, it's kind of become like a little bit of a, I don't know if it would have been, like, starred by IGN per se. I know that they're definitely one of the very big names in it, but it has definitely become like a bit of an echo chamber among big outlets of handling things in this way. And there's a lot of, like, general practices and ways that they handle reviews that I find kind of echo around big platforms like that. One of which is, you know, this kind of scale of, like, oh, 6 is bad, 7's mess, stuff like that. But also other ideas, like, a lot of these big platforms, I feel personally, like, I can't say for sure that this is how they're rating them, but what I feel like a lot of the time how they rate games is based on how they expect them to be rather than how good it is as, like, a standalone game. Like, whenever you see, like, big releases from, like, big names, it's usually they're gonna get, like, favorable reviews, whereas when you get more niche things that, you know, the media isn't too focused on, they don't really care as much, and they don't, you know, usually delve into it to the same degree and usually give them lower ratings there. Like, for example, look across the entire Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series, and whenever it comes to, like, big outlets reviewing them, they usually get, like, relatively meh or crappy reviews a lot of the time. But when it comes to actual user scores and people playing them, it's always amazing for the Mystery Dungeon titles, for example.
Yeah, that's another thing too, is, like, they'll clearly give higher reviews to the games that are expected to be great. Instead of just like, oh, like, if they review an indie game, it might not be reviewed as well, even if it's great. So I think that influence that big gaming outlets have on reviewing is kind of a big part of why people don't like assigning a number to a game. Like, they'll accept the review, but they don't like the number thing.
Yeah.
Like, if you go into the comments of so many YouTube videos, they'll be like, oh, why you gotta put a number on it? The review is fine.
Yeah.
The review speaks for itself. And oftentimes, like, I'll be watching a review and dude will be like, oh, this game is great. He'll be just glowing the whole time. Then at the end, he gives it a 7. Like, what? Like, the number can kind of contradict the actual review itself. So it's like, what is really the point of it?
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't put into proper context other similar reviews that they've done. Where, I think I have an image somewhere on my computer about this for what exactly it was. Oh yeah, here it is. So, when it came to IGN IGN did a review for Xenoblade Chronicles for the Wii, the original release, the 3DS, so the port that came over to that system, and Definitive Edition on the Switch. And their review of Definitive Edition on the Switch said that it was like really good, it's nothing but better than the other games, and it got the lowest score out of them all. They gave the Wii version a 9 out of 10, the 3DS version an 8.7, and Definitive Edition 8. So it's the best version of Xenoblade, which is why it gets the lowest score.
Yeah, that's classic IGN, bro. I don't know what else to say. I mean, but the other thing too is like, especially with YouTubers and just like what would be the term, like non-professional reviewers, which are the better ones, by the way. Their opinions can change over time.
Yeah.
But like if you look on their channel, that game is still rated an 8. But maybe now they've changed their opinion. Maybe now it's a 9. Maybe now it's a 7. But it's still an 8 on the channel, and they can't go back and change that. So like if you give a game a number, this is your definitive opinion on the game forever.
Yeah, and even if
it's kind of risky.
Like even if you make like a short follow-up video or something like that, being like, I've changed my mind, the number's different, that's only gonna get like a fraction of the views and attention and traffic compared to the initial thing, and your idea of this game will still be like cemented as that initial thing.
Exactly. So with all that in mind, it kind of seems like it sucks to give a game a review number. Like, we should just stop doing it, huh? But actually, I don't really think so. I think, for a lot of reasons, it's pretty good. For the thing we mentioned earlier, that it's convenient, first of all. But I also think a score can help you determine, like, which games are better than others. I know a lot of people don't like, but it is useful. Like, say, for example, someone whose opinion I really respect reviews Arkham City. And he gives it, like, I don't know, a 9.6. And like, okay, a 9.6, yeah, Arkham City's a great game. So then another game comes out, let's just say God of War for some random example, and he gives God of War a 9.7. So now I'm thinking, whoa, this game is better than Arkham City? I gotta at least see what he's talking about. And I gotta actually check out the review. I gotta check out this game now. So stuff like that could actually be useful when it's someone's opinion that you respect.
Yeah, it definitely can be. When it comes to like comparing one game to another though, a lot of reviewers aren't going to base their scores off of comparing it to other game scores that they've given. They're probably just going to be going in with like fresh slate, let's rate it from 1 to 10, or however they end up scoring it, without taking into context, this is the score that I gave for previous games. Is this game better than those other games? One example that I can draw on that could be an interesting system for people to review games, but it might be a lot to keep track of if they end up reviewing a lot of games, is at Taekwondo Festival. So I've been in Taekwondo basically all my life, and before COVID, we would have this yearly event called Festival, which is basically like track and field for Taekwondo students. And one of the events would be Pumse, which are like these patterns of movements that simulate a real fight. And there's many of us judging this, so there'll typically be 3 or 4 of us judging what'll usually be like 4 contestants in a round. We score them, we pass our slips back to people behind us that like add them up to determine like who won that round, like who had like the best form, the best stances, best concentration, stuff like that. And the way that we handle scoring for that is the very first person that comes up, we always give them a 7.0, no matter how good they were. Like if they were the best like Pumse we've ever seen, or like the worst one we've ever seen, we always give them a 7.0. And then everyone else that comes up after that, we base their scores off of that first one's. Was it better than the first one? Was it worse than the first one? And make like micro adjustments starting from 7 based off of that, rather than doing like a fresh slate kind of thing. And that also helps us average out the scores, because if one of us is scoring like, oh, first person is a 7.3, second person is like a 7.5, and fourth person is a 6.8, and the other judge is scoring them like, oh, this person's a 2, this person's an 8, this person's a 5. That person's opinion is going to hold a lot more sway over the final thing. So by basing us all around this similar system, it means that all our opinions on like who had the best Pumse there should hold like pretty equal sway, rather than such drastically different systems.
That does sound pretty interesting, but the thing that immediately comes to mind is it's kind of unfair to the guy who goes first, isn't it? Like, if he does a perfect 10, he just gets screwed.
No, because we never tell them their scores, we just tell them what place they got relative to one another. So like,
Okay.
so like this person, you know, had the best one, so they get gold. This person gets silver. This person gets bronze, stuff like that. Then we never actually tell them what their score was. So we never tell them like, oh, your Poomsae was a 7, sucks to suck, you know.
But how would that work with reviewing games?
And you would probably just have to like,
in theory.
It's more of like an in theory thing there, but it makes me wonder if you could like choose like some games as a frame of reference. So for each individual reviewer, what do you personally feel is a 10 out of 10, and what do you personally feel is a 1 out of 10? Now, let's make the spectrum based off of that, and maybe add some other ones there, like what do you personally think is a 5 out of 10? So for me,
yeah,
I might...
those two would be important.
So for me, I might say like, oh, what I see is like a 10 out of 10 is Xenoblade Chronicles. What I see as a 1 out of 10 is Roller Coaster Tycoon World. Let's base this around that, you know? It's not a lie. Like, the Roller Coaster Tycoon World
Really?
sucks.
You actually think it's a 1, though?
The game barely even functions.
That's crazy.
Awful.
I've never played a game that I genuinely thought was a 1. That's terrible.
It's so bad. Maybe I put Roller Coaster Tycoon Adventures down there because that game was literally a scam, but that's unrelated.
No, don't start your video essay here in the middle of the podcast.
No, I already have a video essay on that on Roller Coaster Tycoon, but maybe I'd say that something like that was, you know, a 1 out of 10. Maybe that's not fair because, you know, there are very few games in the industry that literally are scams. Like, that was straight up, like, fund our game, give us money to fund this game, and they basically used none of the money funded to it to fund their game. They just used it on themselves. So maybe that's not, like, a fair kind of thing there, because what other instances are you going to see of that in the gaming industry? Apart from maybe, like, NFT game rug pulls, or something like that, like Pixelmon.
Yay.
Or EA, you know?
Yeah.
Or things like that. So maybe a more fair 1 out of 10 would be something like a Roller Coaster Tycoon World, where it's like, the game itself isn't a scam, it's just garbage, you know? And then maybe I could base a scale off that. So if I'm giving like a, if I give a game like an 8 out of 10 or something like that, I don't think it's like 80% of the way to absolutely perfect flawless, because the thing that I decided was 10 out of 10 isn't perfect and flawless. It has its fair share of issues, but it's like 80% of the way to the thing that I would give a 10 out of 10, you know? But, you know, it would be really difficult to express that this is how you're rating things, especially considering when people are looking for how good a game is and are checking all these different platforms and all these different reviewers. They're just going to want that number score, and they're going to want to know, like, does this person think this game is good or bad? They're not going to look up, what is this person's frame of reference for their scale?
Well, no, that's true, but if someone wants that information, it's good that they can actually go and get it, instead of just guessing.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much what you have to do for, like, everything right now.
Like, look into things to understand the full context here?
No, I mean, you'd have to guess.
Oh.
Because with IGN, it's a bunch of different reviewers. So it's like, I don't know this specific guy's way of reviewing games, or how it compares to this other guy's way of reviewing games. That's why IGN has, like, that's probably why that Xenoblade game that they said was the best was reviewed the lowest. It was reviewed by a completely different dude who reviewed the other ones.
And it's also a very interesting platform with IGN, considering, you know, it could be literally a completely different person every time they review it, considering, what was that thing going around like half a year ago where they were offering people like $20 to write reviews for them, or something like that? I don't know if you heard about that.
I did not.
You did not?
Only $20? That explains a lot.
It might not have been $20, but it was some ludicrously low amount. They made like some official post where it's just like, hey, we need more people to review our stuff. We're willing to like commission people like $20 for you to do a review on our platform of just like anybody. So it's like, you know,
nah, bro.
So it's like a TEDx talk compared to a TED talk where it's like anybody can do it, but then you can say that you did a TEDx talk or say that you did a TED talk even if you didn't do a real TED talk, except doing it with IGN where it's like, oh, I did an IGN review. When they announced that, I was honestly debating about starting to do some reviews for IGN just to not for the money, like not because of that, but just so that there could be like some actual like not ass reviews on their platform. Okay, I shouldn't say that.
That's not what I was expecting.
I shouldn't go that
fair,
far.
Though. That's fair.
This is what happens when I ramble without a script. This is why I script my video essays.
Well, that's good. That's the whole thing of a podcast. We're just supposed to be off the cuff talking. Okay, well, when you look at it that way, maybe I would do it too.
So I was debating about doing that, but yeah, that was a thing going around a little while back. So, but because of stuff like that, it means that, you know, people that are doing reviews for IGN, or maybe even other platforms, we're just using like IGN as like a case example, as like a big platform that, you know, everyone recognizes. So,
Yeah, because everyone knows them.
yeah. So it's possible that, you know, the reviews could be written by anybody at whatever point, potentially, since, you know, if they're doing stuff like that, it doesn't mean that you need to go through like a whole job application thing. They're gonna check your background information, see what kind of experience you have. Nah, just, you want to write a review for us, use $20. I think I should probably double check this.
$20, dude. How long would you make a review for $20? What kind of review would you make? How much effort would you put into it?
I guess probably not a whole lot. I mean, I would there if I was trying to do it just for the sake of, like, you know, actually putting good reviews there. Looks like I wasn't I wasn't mistaken here. Yeah, April 2022. IGN is looking for freelancers to assist with the daily flow of stories in games, entertainment, tech, and science. $20 base rate per story. Sliding scale for heavier reporting. DM with an introduction and portfolio for details. Yep. So it was $20.
So let's say that's $10 an hour. I'm putting in 2 hours of work and calling it a day. We're done. I don't even care how unfinished it is. That's it.
Easiest $20.
Yeah, literally. I mean, they don't care. Why should I care?
That's fair enough there.
I think we got kind of a little off topic, which is fine.
Well,
but,
this still relates to reviews and such.
Yeah.
Like, maybe not necessarily about review scores, but this pertains to, like, how good and accurate and thought out is a review score going to be if it's being done by somebody that's getting paid breadcrumbs.
See, I like how you spun that around to bringing it back. That was good. That was
it's
nice.
Related.
Okay,
it's a related topic.
Yeah. No, see, it is related. You're right. Okay. But you were talking earlier about people explaining what makes like a perfect 10 to them and like how they determine what's a 5, what's a 1, like a scale, something like that. To me, a 10 out of 10 is a perfect game. And that's why I wouldn't rate any game a perfect 10 unless it was perfect. The way I go about reviewing games, personally, I'll look at it and I'll be like, okay, what makes this not a 10? What is detracting from this that makes it not a 10? And what is good here that makes it whatever number it is, a 9 or an 8 or whatever?
That makes it higher, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what is good here that makes it better than just being a bunch of detractors, basically? And I find that works out pretty well.
Do you know about the ways that I've rated my most recent Pokemon essays, the Legends Arceus one and BDSP ones? I don't know if you've seen those videos and know how I kind of sum up the score at the end.
No, I don't.
The way that I did it in those is I just made a list of every single pro and con in the respective games. And
yeah, I do that too.
I use that to essentially make a score, like how many pros are there versus how many cons are there. Use that to make a score. And at first that sounded like a really cool idea to me when I first started doing it. As the months have gone on, I've been thinking on it some more and being like, is this really like even the best way to score? Because the issue with me scoring things like that is it weighs every single pro and con with equal weight to one another.
Yes,
like,
that's exactly what I was about to ask.
Yeah. So, like, I might end up doing it in my Scarlet and Violet video essay coming up, just because it's like something that people like to see and it sums up the essay really well. But in terms of actually basing the final score off of that, all the pros versus all the cons, and like what's the difference in these numbers, it feels like it doesn't quite even capture what an accurate score for it would be, because it holds these things with equal weight. So yeah, I've wondered, like, should I just give it an actual score? I don't like doing like actual review scores, which is why I tried doing this system, but now I don't like this system, so what do I do to it? Do I assign like points by weight of how significant each of these things are, or like what could I do there? But because that'd actually be something that I'd like to brainstorm with you at one point, because I actually tried to figure out like a good way to review games myself. It's like a skeleton, like half finished, but you might be interested in it. I'll show you later. A new format.
Yeah, a new format. Like,
to
have some consistency.
During my BDSP playthrough, one idea for a format of reviewing games at least in terms of their glitchiness, was there was a glitch in BDSP that made it so on the little panel where like the gym leader appeared where you were facing them, their sprite could spawn like all over that panel during like the thing that think would be set in stone. Like it would vary every time you rebooted the game. It was weird. And I first noticed it with the gym leader Rourke. So we started calling it the Rourke scale, and there was memes during that playthrough about how we were gonna base games, or at least their glitchiness, based on where they land on the Rourke scale. That's the way to do it.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty funny. You should definitely do that at least for your games, like for how glitchy they are.
Should I do that for the Scarlet and Violet video essay when I go through the glitches? Yes. Give it a rating on the Rourke scale.
Absolutely, it's gonna be so funny. You're gonna get like 20 comments about it, and they're all gonna be me. But don't worry about that.
I mean, anybody who tunes into that doesn't have the context of this or my BDSP playthrough or BDSP essay is just gonna be like, "What the heck is he talking about? Rourke scale?" You know?
Well, it builds up a lore for your channel.
It builds up a lore.
Exactly. All the best channels have lore. Don't ask me for examples. I don't have any, but just trust me.
I just know that all the best ones have some lore, and because I don't have any examples, that means that I don't watch any good channels. No.
And well, I watch you, so what does that say about you?
Oh, dang.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh. Can't believe you've done this.
Well, what next? Well, we kind of got off track again, which again is not a bad thing.
I mean, one thing that I think would be interesting to discuss, like as was being mentioned a little bit earlier to backpedal to it, was the idea of one's opinion on a game changing over time. You know, because that's something that I've noticed myself recently with this channel. You know, I do a freaking bazillion playthroughs on this channel, evidently. And that means that sometimes I come back to playing games that I haven't played in a long time, that I'm playing for the first time on this channel, but I haven't played in like a really, really long time. And one of the biggest examples of me changing my opinion on a game was Assassin's Creed Unity, which I started at the beginning of last year, I believe. And that game released in 2014, I think it was, as like a super glitchy mess and stuff like that. And I put a lot of hours into that game when it first came out. There was a lot of really unhealthy hype for that game leading up to release, and I was someone that was unhealthily hyped for that game when it was coming out. And I played it, and I was like, wow, this sucks, and it's probably my least favorite game in this whole series. But then I played it in the beginning of, like, last year, and while it was still pretty glitchy, a lot of the glitches were fixed. But there were also other issues that I had back then, like with the story when it first came out, that when I played it early last year, I was like, huh, you know, with like this new lens that I have playing this as an adult nowadays, I think this is actually one of my new favorites in this whole series. And I was really surprised, because it used to be one of my least favorite in the whole series. But had I done a review of that game when it first came out, and I had that super negative opinion, I was like, wow, this just really, really sucks. Would that have just been what people saw that as for me, like, so assuming I was like a big reviewer?
Yeah, I feel like a big reviewer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, would that just be set in stone, and then, you know, that's what people's opinions of the game are going to be if they don't play it? And
yeah, no, it could very well be.
And another kind of side topic of that when it comes to comparing games to one another, I feel like one of the reasons why I hated that game back when is because of how it drew too much similarity to other, like, Ubisoft games that I played right around that time, and I was comparing it to those ones too much, essentially. Yeah. Whereas now playing it isolated on its own, I was able to, like, differentiate in my head and not focus on that. Like, the biggest point of that,
I do think that's a fair point of comparison, though. Like, you used to be able to compare games to other previous iterations, but yeah.
The specific thing that I got, like, really tired of in that context, spoilers for Assassin's Creed Unity here, but at the end of the story, the main character, Arno, his, like, partner / love interest character dies during, like, the final encounter. And when I was playing it back when, I was like, oh, come on, really? Because Ubisoft had just done that in Watch Dogs that released, like, the year prior. And in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, where, well, it wasn't really the love interest, but an important female character, we'll say, for both these games. They killed off the equivalent in Watch Dogs and in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, that had both released the year prior. And playing it then with that, like, lens, I was just like, oh, come on, can they, like, not come up with anything else? Like, are you serious? But nowadays, playing it as an isolated game, and having a lot greater knowledge of storytelling and arguments that games make, nowadays I'm able to recognize, like, wow, they actually made some really interesting arguments with that, because Arno was more focused on her and, like, the important people in his life, and only revenge second, but she was more focused on revenge first, and only caring for him second, and, like, those that are important to her. And by doing that, it got her killed, and that's, like, a really symbolic thing there, and I was able to have, like, a lot greater appreciation for that on replaying it later. So, my opinion of the game drastically changed while looking at it, like, both playing it as an adult nowadays and being able to recognize his arguments, and also not seeing it through the lens of, I just played these other games where something similar happened and I'm getting tired of seeing the same thing over and over again,
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good example. I do kind of feel like comparing games to their, I mean, I sort of said this already, and this is kind of a little bit off tangent, but with Mario Sunshine, a lot of people don't like how often that game gets compared to Mario 64, because, 64 did a lot of things that Sunshine didn't do. Believe it or not, Sunshine has a lot of problems that 64 already figured out. I don't know what was going on there, but the game gets, like, they get compared a lot, and Sunshine fans don't like that, because they're like, oh no, just look at the game on its own merits. You don't have to compare it to 64. And that's true to some extent, but, like, Sunshine is a sequel to 64. It's fair to compare them often.
Yeah, it's
so I feel like
the next game there.
I feel like it's still fair for you to have those old opinions, but I mean, that's a little unrelated to your overall point, but that's just a little tangent on what to go on.
And that's also something that we can see in games like Pokemon, for example, where it's like all the main series games follow the same formula of you're like some 10-year-old kid or some young kid, either way, like maybe not always 10, and you go out, defeat the gym leaders, take on the Pokemon League, take down some team along the way that might be evil or not, and roll credits and stuff. And it's like the same kind of formula and story, essentially every time.
Yeah,
like
for 20 years.
The intricacies of the story have changed throughout that time, but the general framework has remained the same. And that is something that is worth, mentioning, hey, this is a drawback here. This is something that can detract from it, because it's not doing something new here. It's still just giving us, like, the same kind of framework of an experience that we've experienced before, rather than doing something very new that we haven't seen yet, like I've heard Pokemon Coliseum does, which I look forward to playing here, like, very soon, when I plan on starting it.
Are you gonna play that game? Holy shit.
Yeah, I'm gonna play it in, like, a couple weeks' time. Or maybe 1 week, I don't know.
I used to play that when I was very little. I'm excited to hear what you think of it, because my thoughts are shrouded in nostalgia. Isn't it like a really expensive game?
Well, I bought it back when you could actually buy it in stores. Like, I started with Nintendo consoles with the Wii. My first console was a PlayStation 2, and then got Wii and stuck with Nintendo consoles from there. And it was after a few years of having the Wii that I found out it was back compatible, and I could play GameCube games. So I would sometimes get, like, used GameCube games from, like, a bargain bin at GameStop. So I got things like Pokemon Coliseum, Mario Sunshine, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. The only one that I spent a lot of time in was Thousand Year Door. I never got past, like, the beginning bits of Coliseum, but I remember thinking it was interesting, so I look forward to actually playing it for real. But anyway.
Well, this brings me to another unrelated question. Would you ever consider reviewing games that you played, like, a long time ago, instead of just games that come out now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just wish that time was infinite,
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you on that.
I mean, I technically did that once before, reviewing a game that's been out for a while with a video essay I did on Dead by Daylight. Technically, that delved into, like, what makes it frustrating. There was also the Breath of the Wild one that I did after it had been out for quite some time.
That's true.
But that's also because, like, that was just by the time that I was doing video essays and stuff, essentially.
Oh, wait. Oh, okay, never mind. I thought you were saying that was just how long it took you to write it. I was like,
oh, no.
God damn.
Oh, no. That was way before I even thought about doing video essays on YouTube, like, ever, when that game first came out. Or there's things like my Roller Coaster Tycoon one that's just like, here's this whole series, essentially, the whole Roller Coaster Tycoon series up to this point, but I guess that was because of a new release that was coming out. But yeah, I mean, I would honestly love to do some ones on, like, the older Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games. I think that would be really fascinating. Maybe some ones on, the older Xenoblade kind of titles. Maybe I shouldn't say older, it's not like they're that much older, but, the previous ones.
Xeno what?
Xenoblade.
Xenoblade, okay.
I haven't played Xenogears or Xenosaga yet. I want to, though. time isn't infinite, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I know. Dude, I always wish I could have this power of doing things while I'm asleep, so I can like get rest and also do stuff.
Oh yeah, that'd be the life there. I have so much more time to work on video essays.
Yeah, specifically video essays.
Well, that's what I spend most of my time editing for the channel in nowadays. Oh man. There's already probably about 100 hours into the Scarlet and Violet essay if you count me plus Eagle's work on it. It's insane. Anyway.
But getting back on track though, because that was
well, I mean,
I'm not gonna say this time, but that was a tangent.
I mean, we could also transition it into saying that like a lot of big platforms also aren't going to be doing the kind of things that I'm doing with stuff like that, because you know, as I just mentioned there's already like 100 hours put into the Scarlet and Violet video essay, and like what do I have to show for it? 2 chapters almost done out of 7, and already clocking in at close to like an hour 20 minutes, and it's like most review platforms aren't gonna be like, alright, we should totally invest the time and resources into making something that insane and like thought out and stuff. Like that's gonna be so expensive. When we can just, you know, just put our general thoughts in a couple paragraphs and then give it like a score at the end. You know, like it's not practical if they want to keep on reviewing many games, because like as you had asked me a second ago of would I ever do, you know, video essays on older already released games, and my answer was yes, but I don't have the time for it. That could very much be the case for these bigger platforms as well, where it's just like if they want to get out as many reviews as they can on, you know, all the new trending things, they don't really have the means to be putting as much time into single like things like that and make, you know, several hour long video essays. And they probably figure that like most of their viewers, I wasn't sure what kind of word to use, most of their fans, most of their like audience,
readers,
probably,
audience is a good
audience is a good word. Yeah, they probably figure that most of their audience just wants something short and sweet to figure out like whether the game is good or bad, as opposed to like tuning into something super long like my video essays. And you know, things like my video essays are getting really popular on YouTube nowadays. Like they've helped me get the channel to the point that it's currently at. There is a lot of interest in longer form content. Yeah, especially since COVID. But I also feel like a lot of people that tune into video essays are those that either already have the game or have like a lot of background knowledge on it and want to see this delved into, rather than someone that's being like, should I buy this game? You know, who would much rather prefer to go to a review score there. Like that's the impression that I get from comments. Most comments that, you know, provide their insight on the game are those who have played the game themselves and, you know, want to see like other opinions on it.
Well, to be fair, the people who are most likely to comment are people who have already played the game and have like a conflicting opinion.
I suppose so. Like maybe it's a little bit of, I don't know what the word is for it. Something or other bias, I guess, for
confirmation bias?
No, not confirmation bias. Maybe like no, it wouldn't be survivalist bias, would it? I don't know if you've heard of that term before.
I have not.
There was this idea where it's like, if a plane is fighting in a war and, you know, it comes back to base with a whole lot of bullet holes in all these places, someone might initially think, like, oh, we should put armor in these places that there's bullet holes, rather than the places that there isn't bullet holes. When really, you should be putting armor in the places that there isn't bullet holes, because if it got shot there, that means that it didn't come back to base. So
yeah, because if the plane came back to base with those bullet holes, clearly it's fine.
Yeah, clearly it survived there. So maybe it's just the kind of thing of like most people who are commenting are those that actually have their own opinion to share, rather than, you know, those that just want to hear mine and then, you know, base their judgment off of that. So it could always be something like that, potentially.
Well, that's what I think it is, because someone who hasn't played the game, like, what opinion are they going to offer on the game? Only thing they could say is something about you and your video, which, you know, they will, but you know, most people are going to want to be commenting about the game.
Yeah,
or less.
That's fair.
So I definitely think, and speaking personally, I've watched a ton of longer reviews on games I've never played in my life, and they have actually gotten me interested in them. And I know for a fact, if you ever go on Twitter, which don't go on Twitter, but if you ever do, there'll be like viral tweets of people saying, "Oh yes, another video essay on a game I've never played. I can't wait to watch it. It's 5 hours long." Like people specifically seek that out. There's just something about hearing someone passionately talk about something you've never heard of that's like very alluring right now.
Yeah, could well be the case. I might have yet to find, a proper place within that niche of talking about things that nobody's ever heard of. Because, like, my Pokemon video essays, it's the largest grossing media IP. This is literally the largest possible fan base / people familiar with this that there could possibly be. Whereas when I do longer form content on more niche things like Dead by Daylight, for example, it's like that's not gonna be getting as much attention. I don't know if maybe those videos just aren't as good, or if it's just like an established audience and people that are familiar
I think
with
your
that.
problem is that the video's on Dead by Daylight. That game kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Nah, it doesn't suck. It doesn't suck. I just don't like it.
Yeah, I quit playing a while back.
Segue. It doesn't suck. I don't like it. That brings me to another point that is kind of related to scores. See, we brought it all the way back. We did it. We made it. When I'm gonna be doing my reviews, this is something I kind of like the idea of that maybe other people could do too. I'll give it 2 scores.
Okay.
One for how much I enjoyed the game, and a separate score for how good I actually think it is outside of my personal bias. Or as outside my biases I can be. So like Mario Sunshine, for example, I gave the game like a 6 or a 7. But my personal enjoyment of it, bruh, I love that game. It's a 9 easily.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna go tell someone else, oh yeah, this game's a 9 out of 10 just because I love it that much, because it isn't.
Yeah.
It's a very flawed game. So I think it's very important to understand the difference between your personal feelings about a game and how good you actually think it is. And that doesn't always come through in a score.
Yeah, that's something that I've thought about as well when it comes to things like some of my favorite games, like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky, that I commonly like to say is my favorite game of all time because I feel like it had the most personal impact on me. It was the game that really introduced to me like this idea of, wow, there can be some really crazy next level stories in games in places that you'd never expected, like a Pokemon game, and that was a story that like really blew my socks off, and I have a lot of respect for it for that reason. And while I think the story and the soundtrack of that game is absolutely amazing, I can recognize that the gameplay of it is really wonky a lot of the time. And a lot of that wonkiness has been fixed by more recent Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games like Super Mystery Dungeon and Rescue Team DX, luckily. But that game on its own, that doesn't have all these quality of life changes, there's a lot about its gameplay that's really, really kind of sucky sometimes. And I noticed that when I played through it early last year, where early last year the channel wound up hitting 10,000 subscribers, and I wanted to do like a special playthrough to commemorate that. So we did Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky, my favorite game of all time. And once again, I loved the story and the music, but the gameplay, there were several times during that playthrough I would just sit there and ask myself, why is this my favorite game of all time? Like, what the hell? Especially when I got like screwed by RNG in so many cases, and it's like, oh come on, our room's just filled with dizzy traps all over the place, and it's like, could you not? Stuff like that. And one idea when it comes to scoring a game that I have thought about for reviews before is maybe scoring each of the individual aspects of the game with the categories of. I typically in my video.
Remember earlier how I was telling you about my different format for rating games?
Yeah.
It's pretty much that. I break a game down into 5 categories and score each individual category, then add up the average.
What are your 5 categories? Are they the same as my categories?
Oh, let me see if I can remember them. Okay. Story, sound, which is like music and sound and all that. Okay. Gameplay. Presentation or visuals. And the 5th one is creativity. Okay. Which is there because I think games like Mario 64, which I don't remember if we were talking earlier in this podcast, we were talking about it earlier. Mario 64 is such an innovative and creative game, but that creativity doesn't get as much credit now when all the things it did so creatively have been copied a million times that it doesn't feel creative when you go back and play it. But it was still really creative, and it should get credit for that. That's why I have a different category just for creativity.
I like that idea there. Yeah, my categories are basically those, except without the creativity one, where my 4, but I like the idea of that one, actually. And that's kind of the way that I divide up my video essays, like my longer Pokemon ones, where I'll have an individual chapter for gameplay, soundtrack, visuals and aesthetics, story. And then, like, the other chapters will be intro, conclusion, and some other thing if it winds up being something that I feel like is worth talking about enough. Like, in the BDSP one, I had a whole chapter about the day one patch situation with that because of how gross that was, you know? But,
yeah.
But I guess when it comes to creativity, I sort of have a chapter that kind of talks about that in my Scarlet and Violet video essay, so I have, like, the same points as always of, like, gameplay, soundtrack, music, and story. But another chapter, this is chapter 2 that I just recently finished making, like, 2 days ago at 2 in the morning, is one that's called The Cost of Open World. And this is just, like, 45 minutes long of talking about how is it as an open world game, and how does it compare to other open world titles in the industry? Like, essentially. So I guess that would be like the closest equivalent of a creativity chapter, and talking about scoring that, in the sense of, you know, there's been plenty of other open world games in the industry. What does this game do as an open world game, and how does it compare to these other open world games? Is it like a creative, interesting new step in an open world direction that gives us something a little bit new that we haven't seen yet? Or is it just taking the label of open world for the sake of taking the label of open world and stopping itself into that without doing anything that hasn't been seen in other open world games yet? So that kind of is sort of like a creativity chapter in that sense, you could say. And that, although that was kind of like a subset of gameplay, you could also argue.
Oh yeah, well, it's definitely a subset of gameplay for sure. But it's just like a subset of gameplay that's so long and so in depth that it deserves its own chapter.
Oh yeah, for sure. So that chapter might end up being longer than gameplay, which is, you know, gonna be everything but anything open world related. So I haven't even finished the script for the gameplay chapter yet, so we'll see which one ends up being longer.
It sounds like you got a long way to go.
I do.
Okay, there's only one more. Oh my god, my screen keeps shutting off because I'm just kind of sitting here talking. There's only one more thing I want to talk about with regards to scores, and that's the ultimate question of, do they do more harm than good? Like, are they necessary? What do you think?
That's difficult there.
I know. That's okay. Well, I'll start with what I think. Okay, it's what I probably should have said. Okay, so the thing about scores is, like I said earlier, they're supposed to be an objective metric because it's a number. Yeah, you know, a number is cold and uncaring. But giving a score to a piece of art that is purely subjective is kind of contradictory. It almost seems like it shouldn't be at all. It seems like it shouldn't be, but the thing is, yes, they're kind of subjective. I think where scores are important are when it's with people whose opinion you respect. Like I was saying earlier with Arkham City, the guy gives a game a 9.6. I'm like, okay, great. He gives another game a 9.7. I'm like, okay, I have to check that out because it's someone whose opinion I respect. It's not just IGN giving the game a 10 again, and it's a completely different guy who's done any of their other reviews. It's like, no, I know this guy knows what he's talking about. I know that I agree with most of the things he says in his thought process. So in that case, a score is definitely very useful because, again, it's still convenient. It's still gonna like get to the point and tell you what it is. And if I like see his score before I watch the review, then that itself could make me want to watch the review. Like, now I want to know his in-depth thoughts. That kind of thing is why I think a score is still useful, but just not all the time. Just only in like the right context.
Yeah, it's definitely important to understand like the mindset that an individual reviewer is coming at it with. Like, you'd be able to get with a channel that you're familiar with, as opposed to some elementary school kid that was paid $20 to write a paragraph for IGN, you know?
Yeah, Someone which I guess could have actually happened, which is crazy. So,
like, it is important to have that background there of like, this is the person's mindset. This is why they think the way that they do. But most reviewers, you're not going to go into having that already established mindset of. You're not going to understand how and why they think the way that they do. And that's why, like, long-form video essays also are probably gaining as much traction as they are nowadays as well, and why I like doing them. Because then it's like, hey, most people tuning into this aren't familiar with me and the way that I'll view these things, so let's really delve into the why of why I think everything is the way that it is, essentially, you know? So when it comes to basic scores, like, you can definitely get value from it if it is someone that, you know, you are familiar with and trust and have an established, like, you have an established idea in your head of what their mindset is going to be. But a lot of the time with big platforms, you're probably not going to get that, especially when the actual person reviewing it, like, you're never going to really know anything about them personally, apart from the little bits of information you glean from, you know, however long the short review is essentially there. So I do think that review scores are useful for the sake of convenience, but they can potentially be damaging in the sense of your frame of reference might be different from theirs, even outside of viewing value in certain aspects of games that some people might not. Even just backpedaling to the idea of someone might see 6 as like, hey, that's pretty good, and someone else might see 6 as like, wow, that sucks, you know? Stuff like that can potentially be damaging. But, you know, for the sake of convenience, it's something that we're not going to be seeing going anywhere anytime soon, and like, can have merit to it. But I feel like a lot of these issues that we brought up are probably why so many people are so turned off to, like, big review platforms nowadays, and do seem to like smaller creators who are actually really delving into why they think something is good or bad. Like, once again, to use the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon example, where it's like big platforms typically rate that like pretty crappily, whereas user scores are usually like, wow, that's amazing, you know?
Yeah.
And people are starting to put a lot more value into user scores than in the past.
I mean, honestly, that's because Metacritic scores are just, I don't know, they seem a little bit paid off to me. I don't know. No, not paid off, but they're not the best anymore. You definitely can't go by that. But yeah, so do you think scores just kind of being a permanent, like, resident of the gaming community, do you think that's a good thing, or just something we got to put up with?
I say that it has its merits. I don't think it would be like what I said at the whole beginning of this discussion, where it's like if someone asked me if Legends Arceus was a good or bad game, that I would say, you know, it's complicated. That would be my answer to that. Our review score is good or bad. It's complicated. You know, it's they do definitely have their merits, but, you know, it does take away a lot of this depth. You know, maybe I'm a little bit biased as someone that does several hour-long video essays that loves to express, like, my full, complete thoughts on a game, and recognize that giving a game a simple score isn't ever going to be able to encapsulate that whole thought process that I would want to express. So, you know, anyone that's getting value just from a score and determining the value in a game through that isn't going to understand, like, the full depth of it that they'd be able to get from either, like, a super long, several hour long review, or just from playing it themselves. But they need to use this for the sake of convenience to base if they're going to, you know, play this game themselves, because money isn't infinite and time isn't infinite, so, you know, people need to be able to make decisions on these things, and because of that, I think that there can definitely be value in it, but we need to be careful with the way that we handle it, you know?
Well, I think what you said earlier is the perfect way to bring it full circle. It's not as simple as it being good or bad.
Yeah.
It's kind of complicated. There's a lot of nuance to it. So, Harmonia, how would you rate the idea of using a score for games?
I don't think I could give it a rating.
I don't think I could either, which I think is the perfect point.
Also, one interesting thing when it comes to review scores that I've been thinking about a little bit recently, as I've been working on the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet video essay, one of the screenshots that I use in one of the sections is this page showing the Google reviews of the game, and I couldn't help but, like, continue to think about the Google reviews of the game, and I'm thinking about this as we talk about, like, user scores versus, like, massive platform scores that I feel like a lot of the time are basing games based off, like, how big they expected to be and how close it was to their expectations, as opposed to users that actually, you know, speak their mind. And Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Google reviews score for it, is probably one of the most peculiar I've ever seen for a game before. I'll just send it over here, but essentially, what it is, usually if a game is pretty good, there'll be, like, you know, a whole bunch of 5s, a decent bit of 4s, and then it'll, like, tailor off towards the bottom. Whereas if a game is really bad, then there'll be a lot of 1s, and then, like, a decent bit of 2s, and, like, some 3s, and, like, a few in, like, the 5s or something like that. Whereas
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it's like, here's an insane amount of 5s, here's an insane amount of 1s, and, like, a tiny little sprinkle of 4 3s and 2s, you know? So, it's just, like, resounding, here's a whole bunch of people voting 1, here's a bunch of people voting that it's, like, the worst thing ever, here's a whole bunch of people voting that it's the best thing ever, and there's basically no in between. It's one of the most peculiar sets of user scores I think I've ever seen. There's slightly more 1s than there is 5s, it is worth noting, but they are pretty close there. And
well, actually, I don't think it's that peculiar, because as I'm looking at this, I've looked at the user scores for Metacritic games before, and it's usually mostly 5s and 1s. It seems like if someone will review a game, 5 equals good, 1 equals bad. It's not like they're not actually using the metric of, oh, 5 is perfect, 4 is really good, 3 is okay, 2 is bad, and 1 is terrible. No, 5 is good, 1 is bad. There's nothing in between. There's absolutely no nuance sometimes, and that is kind of the risk with going by purely user scores too. So there's no one right answer between user scores and Metacritic scores or whatever.
So there's some skepticism to be had with either or.
Exactly.
But yeah,
it looks like the game's rating is pretty close to a perfect 2.5 though.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
It's a little more skewed towards the positive, which is weird. Because looking at the reviews, it looks like there are more 2s and 1s to anything else. But
there's definitely more 1s than there are 5s, but I guess there's like a decent smidge of 4s in there.
Yeah, but there are more 2s than 4s, is what's interesting.
Wait, really? Let's have a look-see here.
At least that's what it's showing on my screen. Oh
yeah, you're right. On the little graphic, it shows there's more 1s than 5s, there's more 2s than 4s, but it's... Oh,
it's positive.
Oh, I know what's going on here. Because we're assuming that, like, 2.5 is the middle ground, but 2.5 would be the middle if the lowest score was 0 and the highest score is 5. But the lowest score is 1.
Oh, so the middle score is 3.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. I never realized that. Okay, so 3 is the perfect middle ground for a out of 5 score.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Indeed. Unless you as a reviewer are willing to rate something 0 out of 5.
Which I would never do. I prefer the out of 10 scale.
Yeah, I don't think that I would ever be able to narrow something down to just purely out of 10. I feel like if I needed to make something simpler, like give something a simple score for the sake of convenience for an audience, I would probably do the system of here's the individual aspects of it: gameplay, soundtrack, story, art style, and aesthetics, and then like maybe creativity there, because I do think that that's like an interesting thing as well that can be worth talking about.
Yeah, we should definitely brainstorm that out later. For sure, because it's the whole thing is unfinished. I'd like to actually finish it at some point instead of just, oh yeah, this game is 7 out of 10. Yep. Wait. Ignore the fact that the gameplay is horrible. It's still 7 somehow.
Wait, the whole thing is unfinished? Wait, are you referring to like if you're reviewing a game, or are you saying that this is like a thought process that's unfinished and we need to finish?
I'm talking about the review scale we were talking about earlier.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Oh, working on figuring out exactly how you'd score a thing for that. I know that you've talked about getting into video essays here and working on some scripts and stuff. So is that the kind of system that you would like to use, like, in your conclusion of projects like that?
In the future, yeah, I would definitely would. I think it's more effective than just saying, yeah, it's a 7. Don't ignore how bad the gameplay is. So like, I figured that would be something I'd do way in the future, but now that you brought it up back on my mind, we can figure that out pretty soon.
So let's say there were these 5 categories, and they were all out of 10. Would that mean that you would give it an ultimate score out of 50 then? Or... Out
of 50? Well, yeah, you could do that. You could rate it anyway. You could rate it out of 10 still and just go by the averages. You could rate it out of 50, out of 100. I don't think the out of part really matters.
Well, what I meant is the whole point of breaking it up into the categories is for the sake of giving each one of these the attention they deserve, rather than saying this entire experience is exactly this way. So by splitting them up individually, but then totaling them like that, it still encompasses the whole thing. So I was basically asking if you feel like that's appropriate to do, or if that takes away from the whole point of splitting them off in the first place.
No, I think that's still fine to do. I think because it's one thing to give your opinion on individual aspects, but it's still important to give your opinion on the whole overall project.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a different thing. That's what most people really want, but like it's important for them to have the context for each individual category. Like, okay, this part is this good, this part is that good, so that they can know like, what they're getting into according to their tastes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, pretty good. We gotta figure that out at some point.
Would you be worried that people might just look at like the final score rather than the individual aspects and be like, oh, this game is this good, and then base their opinion off of that rather than the individual aspects? Or
well, I feel like they're kind of putting themselves in hot water if they do that. So like
that's on them then.
I did everything I could. Like I put it there. If you don't want to read it, that's on you. But yeah, I would kind of be worried that people might do that, but I wouldn't stress about it.
Gotcha.
Now we're doing a podcast of Harmonia interviewing me on how I'm gonna
how you're gonna review games. One thing that I think would be interesting to talk about a little bit is how exactly would we rate like creativity / like its influences on the industry. So something that we were talking a little bit about before starting this recording, for example, was the fact that Mario 64, while being far from the first 3D game or even the first 3D platformer, it was still a game that was like very new to 3D. It was still like the very beginning of 3D in the gaming industry, since, you know, that was a launch title for the N64, so people that were playing Nintendo consoles would go from SNES to N64 and have to figure out how does traversal on a 3D plane work. Mario 64 had introduced the idea of the camera by conceptualizing it as literally a camera that Lakitu held on like a little fishing pole, and whenever you were moving the camera around, it would show the Lakitu symbol in the corner and show that you're moving Lakitu around and stuff, and that would help give the idea that, hey, that's how the camera works, and get people used to this new thing that they weren't familiar with in the gaming industry. And that's something that you know, can definitely get some good points for in creativity, in my opinion.
I would agree, yeah.
So is that something that we would hold in high regard for, you know, its creativity, even if it seems kind of wonky by today's standards, just for like the influence it was able to have?
You mean the camera itself, or them including Lakitu to contextualize it?
Just like all of that, essentially. Just like the way that they implemented it in such a way that made it easy for the player to understand and get used to.
No, I think they would definitely get points for that, because the thing about Mario 64's camera, I think it is a really good camera considering they had almost nothing to work with, but it's just not nearly good enough for Mario 64. So, like, it's a good camera, but relative to the rest of the game, it's not up to par with everything else. But I still think it is a net positive. Yeah.
And that's what I feel like as well, where, you know, you can recognize the influences that it was able to have in the industry and the things that the impact that it was able to leave on its player base. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, there was a game that I played, Tales of Vesperia. It was my very first Tales of game that originally released in 2008 on the Xbox 360 and PS3, I think, something like that. I played it on the Switch, but, you know, it still basically looked and played like back then, even if it was the definitive edition or whatever. And playing through that game, there was a lot of it that was like, wow, this really did not age that well. And while there were some interesting things with its story sometimes, I just was not exactly in the best of moods playing through it, being like, wow, this didn't age all that great. And people keep on saying that it's apparently one of the best Tales of games in the whole series, and I'm just sitting there like, wait, what? How? But I was able to recognize some of the things that were really interesting about it and the influences that it was able to have on later games. Like, I played Bravely Default when it first came out, for example, and one of the things that Bravely Default had was the ability for you to essentially ride this ship around the overworld, where you would basically back out of the overworld, go to like a much larger map, and pilot like this little mini ship around on the map. And it could also become an airship later, where you would fly around the whole region. You would no longer be locked to the waters. That was something that was done by Tales of Vesperia, and so having played Bravely Default before, and then playing Tales of Vesperia was like, oh, maybe that's where they got that idea from. Like, this game first like, maybe it wasn't the first that implemented that, but it was a very similar idea in a significant series, so I wouldn't be surprised if it did inspire stuff like that in games like Bravely Default. So, even though there was a lot of aspects of the gameplay that I was like, wow, that wasn't all that great, I was able to recognize some of the influences it was able to have, and I can absolutely commend it for that, and if I was giving it, you know, score on its creativity, I would definitely take that into account.
Well, I'm not saying you're doing this with that, but I think this kind of ties back into what you were saying earlier with pros and cons and how each of them were valued equally. I think with regard to stuff like being innovative and revolutionizing the gaming industry and shit like that, like you have to look at how much did it actually revolutionize, like how much did it innovate? Because if it's just, oh, it's innovative, it's creative, but it didn't really add that much, it's just something that's kind of cool, then it can't add too much to the game. It shouldn't get a high score necessarily. So we got to take like that nuance into account.
What do you feel about, like, how would you rate something's inclusion of a mechanic or something or other that did end up having a big impact on the gaming industry, that like changed things and took things in a new direction that would become like a new standard, but was seen as like a super negative, awful thing that was difficult to figure out at the time? Because this is something that has happened in games before. Like, the case that comes to mind is the game Alien Resurrection. I don't know if you've ever heard about what was wacky about that game.
I've never heard of that game.
So, it was a game from the Aliens franchise, evidently, and so like the movies and stuff like that. And the weird thing about this was a game from the year 2000, PS1. From me looking it up here to like double check this. And the really weird thing about Alien Resurrection from 2000 is it did this hella weird thing where you would move with the left stick, you would control your character with the left stick, and you would aim your gun and camera with the right stick. So weird. Like, it was unheard of.
That's terrible.
And reviewers of the time were giving it some flack for that, saying, like, this is difficult to figure out, this is strange, this, like, what is this? What the hell? But nowadays, controlling your character with the left stick and like moving your camera with the right stick is just like the standard of pretty much any 3D game, you know? And it was really weird when I was playing Metroid Prime, for example, and, you know, that wasn't the case, and I had to get used to it feeling more like a rail shooter, because, you know, the right stick was changing out my current equipped blaster, essentially. But,
yeah, it's a tank controls game.
Yeah, so there's stuff like that where at the time, the mechanic was seen in a negative light, and because it was difficult for people to figure out and get used to. But nowadays, people would look at that being like, oh, that's an essential thing. Like, that's just the standard, you know? So, what would you feel in terms of rating something like that, where it did end up being a net positive on the industry as a whole, but people didn't like it at the time?
Well, I feel like with stuff like that, you have to really look past how people feel about it and like try to look at how does this actually impact the game and like give it a chance. How does this impact playing the game? Does this make life easier? Is this actually better? And, like, could other games use this? Because like when you play Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 2 doesn't have that either. It doesn't have that controlling the gun with the right stick. You do everything with the left stick. It could have used that. So like looking at this, it's like, well, Metal Gear Solid 2 would be better if it had this left stick thing, which I'm not saying it would be. If any Metal Gear Solid 2 fans are listening, I'm just saying, hypothetically, as an example, maybe Metal Gear Solid 2 would be better with that. But I don't think paying attention to what people thought about it at the time is necessarily the right way to go. But I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because you could definitely have gotten that impression, since we're purely talking about positive things before. Or things that people perceived as positive at the time, like the camera.
What do you feel like maybe this might contradict some ideas, though, being like, we have to ignore what people thought of it at the time and just purely look at it for, you know, how it plays today and its impacts and stuff like that. When we can talk about something like Mario 64 and be like, wow, controls-wise and platforming-wise, it's pretty wonky by today's standards, you know?
Well, I don't think that contradicts it, no, because even Mario 64, that was still revolutionary. It was still very creative. It's just that it wasn't as good as it needed to be. It was still flawed.
And wouldn't quite hold up by today's standards.
Well, sure. It definitely doesn't. But I think I don't really think you need to pay that much attention to what people are saying. Maybe there's a situation where you should. It's definitely good to have that in mind, but I don't think that should dictate your opinion. Like,
just look at it purely from your own experience.
Well, not necessarily. Well, okay. That's a good thing to point out. Not just your experience, but try to use your experience and other people's experience to figure out what the game is doing. Because what you're looking at here is the game itself. You're trying to get as close as possible as you can come to fully understanding the game and what it's doing.
Mhm.
And you don't want that to be clouded by your bias or other people's bias or whatever else.
Mhm.
Yes.
But-
Another
but-
curveball. I'm ready.
But I mean, what would you constitute as like leaving your bias out, for example? Like for example, when it comes to the story of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, this is just like I can't words today. This is just a good example of drawn because it's what I have in the back of my mind right now because it's like a script that I'm working on recently. So like I'm talking too much about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. That's the reason why. But for example, I personally prefer like heavier tones of stories that go down like some darker and more serious discussion topics that really get you thinking like, huh, that was really crazy and like, you know, mess with your emotions and stuff like that. Maybe that's because my first super story intensive game was Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky. Maybe that's what instilled that in me. But when I look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's story, I'm just like, huh, this had a lot of potential to do that, but it just didn't take the time to explore that. So I'm working like both in like notepad kind of form and in my head mentally on how I would do like a story rewrite of Scarlet and Violet. And that's something that I'm working on in my video essay script. This is for the first time in a video essay, I'm gonna propose like a full-on story rewrite with a different version that I make that as I keep on plotting it out, it's way darker than the than the original would be. And it's got me to just sit and think like, huh, would this be acceptable in a Pokemon game? I mean, outside Mystery Dungeon. Mystery Dungeon always delves into like more serious subjects, but in a mainline Pokemon game, would this like even be able to get the green light? But anyway, that's the point is like me preferring like deeper stories like that and more serious tones and feeling like the game would be better off by delving into more serious tones. Would that be like my own bias showing and clouding my judgment when maybe it is better off as like a simpler story in especially a series like Pokemon that is meant to appeal to all audiences? Like they handle their marketing primarily towards children, but in terms of like the intended player base, I'd say that it's meant to appeal to all audiences. Just generally anyone can play, and that was, you know, something really good showcased by Pokemon Go was like, yeah, this is something that anyone can play and get into. So would my own view of liking more serious topics cloud my judgment in that sense? And would it not be appropriate to include something like that where maybe I'm not the exact target audience, you know?
Well, okay, that's interesting. I don't know what you actually have written, so I can't really say for sure. But in general, I think having some darker elements that are not necessarily like obvious is a good thing. Like, what would be an example?
Pokemon Mystery
Put it
Dungeon.
in like, to put it in maybe I haven't played that game in forever. To put it in gameplay terms, look at the Mario games. You know how people play these games when they're 4 years old, people play these games when they're 30 years old. So how do you make it complex enough for the 30-year-old to enjoy it and still simple enough for the 4-year-old to understand it?
Gameplay wise or story wise?
We're talking about gameplay wise.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to translate it into story.
Okay.
So like the thing that you see, the thing that jumps out at you is super simple. Like anyone can understand. Your mom could easily do it. A 4-year-old could easily do it. Someone who's never played games before would be like, how would I translate this to story? The point I'm really trying to make is that the part that appeals to the core audience, or in Pokemon's case would be like kids and stuff, is the thing that jumps out at you. But you have to try a little harder to look to find the darker stuff, like darker lore.
Before you continue that thought process, a little note. Pokemon's core audience is actually young adults. Even if they handle their marketing towards children, the majority of the player base are actually young adults, interestingly enough. But they still handle the marketing as if it's, you know, directed mostly towards kids, even though, you know, that's, while it is a significant part of their audience, the majority is young adults, usually people around like 19 to 24.
Do you think the devs are designing for young adults? Or you think they're designing more for kids?
Probably designing more for kids.
Okay.
And Colosseum, like, just talking about that game like a tiny smidge, that was also an interesting case. I've seen a couple of videos talking about the development of Colosseum, and one of the things that they did with Colosseum was have a protagonist that's a little bit older and isn't, you know, just a typical goody two-shoes kind of kid there, because they wanted to, apparently the reason for that is they wanted to kind of grow with the audience there. I think the age of the character in that game, Wes, was 16, because they figured that, like, now in Generation 3, the people who started out with Generation 1, when they were around, like, 10, they would be around 16 by now. So, in that way, the developers of Colosseum tried to have their game actually grow with their audience in that way, something that the mainline games don't really pursue. Anyway, that's I don't know how related that is, but that was a
interesting note when it comes to audience. Okay, I mean, that is cool. Okay, your original question was, okay,
like, bias of something that appeals to me that might not appeal to the rest of the audience. Like, how would I factor that in when I'm rating a game? If I say, like, this game is worse off for not delving into those topics, even though it hinted that it might, and then just being like, get pranked, no, we're not. And preferring, like, my darker rewrite.
Well, I thought your thing was, like, should that rewrite be, like, allowed to be in there if it's partially because of your bias when it's not necessarily appealing to the whole audience? I thought that's what you're saying.
Well, should that rewrite be taken as, like, this is the better thing, when that might not be seen as the better thing to general audiences, and that might just be the bias in my own head? Like, in what way do I judge this game story for, you know, not pursuing, like, darker paths like that, when maybe the general audience wouldn't even want that to have been done in the first place?
Okay, I get what you're saying, and I have an answer that I think is good. Let's see if I can say it with words.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the key is just to, man, holy shit. That's a hard question, because it's like, I have it, but, like, I can't grasp it, you know?
Firmly grasp it.
I might have to come back to that one. Yeah, we might just have to come back to that one. Okay.
But yeah, or, like, one type of story might be for somebody, but, like, not somebody else. Or something that I've seen in some types of games before is some people just won't like certain types of games, even though there is, like, an audience for it, but might, you know, rate something a certain way off of the idea that, like, it doesn't appeal to them personally. Like, take a game like Fire Emblem, for example. It's a turn-based tactical RPG where you move units around a battlefield. Maybe some people are really used to playing action games, and that's something that I've seen before, where there are people who play, like, a lot of action games, and then will try out a new Fire Emblem game for the first time and be like, yeah, I don't know about that. Whereas, you know, it's not anything new to the Fire Emblem series, it's just something new to what they're experiencing there, and that, you know, maybe someone will be like, oh my goodness, I've never tried a game like this before, that's really cool, that's really fun, like I was when I first tried Fire Emblem with Blazing Sword back when I was in junior high school. But other people might look at that and be like, yeah, this kind of game really isn't for me, I'm really not getting into it. Like, there was one content creator friendo that was going through a lot of the Mario RPG titles, for example, that was going through, like, the Paper Mario games, Super Mario RPG, Mario and Luigi, and Mario and Rabbids was under that title as well. And Mario and Rabbids was, like, a very different beast, because similar to Fire Emblem, it's a tactical turn-based game where you're moving units around a battlefield. And when they were telling me about their progress in that, it seemed like there was some mixed thoughts and, like, some iffiness on that, being like, huh, this is strange and different, having not, you know, had a lot of experience within that kind of type of game, of tactical games where you move them around a battlefield and stuff.
Okay, so the thing you're describing right now, though, is like, you're not really saying, oh, it's better, it's just, oh, this is different and not what this type of audience might prefer.
But what if someone experiencing that is someone who is, like, a big established reviewer and uses that to say in their review, this type of gameplay sucks, when it's a type of gameplay that some people might actually really like, but it's just a genre or something that the reviewer doesn't like?
Well, in that case, they would definitely be biased.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is, do you think that your written thing is actually better for Pokemon, or is it just better for you?
Is it a better story? I would say yes. Is it a better story for Pokemon, though? That's where it's like, maybe not, I don't know.
Well, if it's not a better story for Pokemon, then it's probably going to be worse in this case.
Maybe. Could well
I haven't seen the story, so I can't say.
I'm not even done with it. I just have like a bunch of bullet points of like these are key things that happen. So, but it's stuff that gets more serious and has like a deeper message, as opposed to the message of like the true treasure was friendship, you know, which I guess I should have figured before the game even came out was gonna be what its lesson was.
In general, the question I have though is like, how would someone go about making sure they're unbiased? And I mean, the thing I would think to do is just like get as many perspectives and opinions as you possibly can, and try to not totally keep out your own feelings, but to keep them in check. And it's like just try and view the game as it is instead of just as you see it or as other people see it.
That's something that I kind of want to try doing with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, since that game introduced like more multiplayer features than we've seen in a Pokemon game in a good while. I plan to start hopping into it with like some other content creator friendos across different sessions and getting their views on it with each session, and see what they have to say and see, you know, what it gets me thinking about and stuff. Something that I plan on doing on that front.
And I also think with your story, it's like you have to think, is this going to be something that most Pokemon fans are going to like?
If they play Mystery Dungeon, they sure would.
But what if they haven't? What if they just played the mainline games?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it depends on like what kind of other games do they play as well. Like, is it just Pokemon? Is that like their one kind of gaming experience, or would it be like other types of games as well that might delve into that with some more depth, something like that?
Well, I think part of what it is we need to understand like what it is that makes Pokemon stories so special or makes them so appealing to people, and understand what they're missing so much.
Would I say that Pokemon stories are appealing per se?
No, probably not. But I mean, they're appealing to someone, probably appealing to kids. So like, I understand what makes them appealing to like a kid maybe playing Pokemon for the first time ever. He's 10 years old. And what makes that appealing for him, and then what would also make it interesting for like people who've been playing this their whole lives, and try and put that in one game without either side conflicting.
I mean, I feel like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon was a really good example of striking the balance with that. Because I was a tiny child when I was playing Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. And, like, the story, the way that it was presenting it was simple enough that, like, I could get behind it. It wasn't pulling off, like, some freaking next-level Xenoblade thing that I, as a kid, would have been like, what the hell's going on? You know, I could follow it, I could understand it. And it was able to get into some heavier tones while, you know, doing it in a way that, like, kids would be able to understand, but also with, like, depth that could only really be appreciated by adults, those that have, like, a bigger lens. A bigger lens? A wider lens? I don't know. Like, a more expanded lens. A wider lens,
I think is the way most people say it, but it works.
Something like that. Like, there are things that I recognize in the Explorers titles, for example, as an adult, that I would have never recognized as a kid. One of the key examples of that being when you're transported to this future of darkness, and you're escaping from the gallows, you escape your execution and stuff, and you're going through this dark world. Your partner notices that there's a light in the distance, and is being like, oh, in this world of darkness, there is some light. But wait, isn't that the stockade? Showing that, like, the one place of light in this world of darkness is a place of execution. That's something I never would have picked up on as a kid. But playing it as an adult, I can be like, wow, okay, you know?
Yeah, I think Pokemon Mystery Dungeon does it well, from what I remember. I haven't played the game since I was a kid, so I'm not the guy to ask. But yeah, you should probably try to pull from Mystery Dungeon then, like you've been doing.
Like, I think that it's a really good example of you know, doing things in a way that, you know, it can carry these serious tones without it blatantly saying exactly what's going on there. Like, it's serious tones that are censored in that way. Like, for example, in that game, there are several characters that either die or are implied to die. It's kind of revealed in, like, epilogue kind of stuff that, like, oh, everyone gets to come back and be safe. But for the sake of the main story, it's implied that several characters die. And how they go about this is by doing a time travel plot line, where it's like, oh, if the future has changed, then us Pokemon from the future will disappear, essentially. So rather than, like, keeling over and dying, it's like fading out of existence, but you can still, you know, you can still get, like, the emotional response that comes with death while still being an everyone 10 and up game or whatever it was rated, you know, and I think that that's I think that was really cool.
Okay, so they pulled a GoldenEye, basically. That's crazy. I don't know if you played that game.
I haven't. I know that it was a really big one there.
Yeah, it's a game when you kill a lot of people. And then at the very end, it's revealed that, oh, actually, it was all a stage play. Nobody really died.
For the sake of ratings?
Yeah, for the sake of ratings.
Okay.
So they basically just did one of those. I don't know how I feel about that in particular, but that is a good example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was something like that. So
I think another good example is Ocarina of Time. Because that game, as a kid, I didn't realize a lot of the darker themes they had going on. Like, did you know that the Shadow Temple is literally like an execution area?
I don't quite think I realized. Like, I played through Ocarina of Time semi-recently, like just this last summer, but I don't quite think I realized.
Yeah, like if you read some of the stone tablets and like look into some of the lore of Kakariko Village, that was a place where the Sheikah were taking people to kill them and torture them and like get information so that they could defend Hyrule Castle and stuff. I was like, God dang, I didn't even know that. Like as a kid, I'm like, oh, this is just a creepy ghost place. Oh, it's cool. So like they found a way to make it appealing to me as a kid and now appealing to me as an adult in a completely different way.
I think that that's something really cool and praiseworthy for a lot of games where they make it so that it's simple enough that a kid can understand it and get like this surface level stuff. Well, at least, you know, for games that are meant to be like family games or things that can be played by, you know, any audience, you know, where they make it in such a way that any audience can enjoy it. Like playing it as a kid, it's like, oh, you can understand the surface level story and get like the main message behind it, and that's really cool. And as an adult, you can go back and be like, wow, look at all this extra hidden depth, and rate it higher in creativity or story because of that. Segue into that. Yeah. I have another really good example of that as well with the Sly Cooper trilogy that I played as a kid.
Okay.
Where I don't know if you're familiar with Sly Cooper or not.
The most familiar I am with Sly Cooper is that PR graphic I made.
Oh yeah, for that one Smash event there. That was cool. Anyway,
hey, thanks. That's all I know though. I just know that one image.
In the Sly trilogy, Sly Cooper, he's this raccoon that comes from a long line of thieves that are like super proud of their family lineage, and they're always like the top of the line thieves and stuff like that, and they are very prideful in that sense. And throughout doing that, they've made a lot of enemies that you fight throughout the 3 games. And what ends up happening in the 3rd game is, while you're facing, here's these antagonists that you have to take down in the first 2 games. In the first game, for the sake of getting back your family books that they stole. In the 2nd game, you're collecting the body parts of your deceased arch nemesis to prevent him from reviving and causing terror once again. It's pretty messed up.
Castlevania 2.
You steal things like his still beating heart. It's pretty crazy. But the plot of the 3rd one, and that's the one that really interests me, is you're trying to break into your family's old vault, where your generations of family line have stored away all these riches that they amassed over the centuries of their thieving. And you can't just waltz into it because someone else has already like taken over the island and like gotten the deed to the island that's located on and is trying to break into it to no avail, because you need the specific key that Sly has, his cane that's been passed down along his family. And like eventually you gather together a team, you manage to break into the vault, you defeat the big bad and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, as a kid, that's what happened. Wow, wasn't that a great surface level story that I was able to enjoy as a kid? Whereas nowadays, as an adult, I look back and see the details that I missed and like the subtle kind of storytelling hints. One of the details that comes up with the main big bad on that island is he used to be part of the thieving crew with Sly's father, and like he was basically the brains of the operation, and when going with Sly's dad before the events of any of the games. And the reason why he wants onto the island to get all the riches there is because Sly's family line was so dang prideful that even though he had like a massive part in acquiring these riches, he was denied having any of it because this family was so prideful that they just had to store away all this wealth, never use any of it, just make all these mountains of gold and stuff like that, just so that they can like bask in their pride and be like, look how awesome we are and stuff. So he felt very betrayed by that. and so he started like obsessing over it since he felt like he had earned it at that point. And it draws some parallels with the brains of Sly's operation, Bentley, and he's trying to convince Bentley over to his side, being like, hey, haven't you felt this way? And Bentley does harbor some feelings of jealousy, but he's able to work past it because, you know, it's a much better crew. But it's also really interesting in recontextualizing things, because throughout this whole trilogy, Sly has put up his family and his father on, like, this pedestal in his mind. He was just as prideful. Like, he was like, wow, these are such amazing people. I want to be just like them. They're amazing. Whereas when you go into the vault and you hear about stuff like this, it's like, huh, maybe his dad wasn't that great of a guy. And you see all these mountains of gold and stuff like that, and the music that plays isn't one of, like, victory or anything like that. It feels very empty and, like, is all this wealth just going to waste by being here? And ultimately, how the trilogy ends up ending is he realizes that maybe he shouldn't be focused on his pride and, you know, being what he expects his family expects him to be, but rather focusing on those that are important to him. And ultimately, he decides to take a hit from the main antagonist in protecting his love interest, this female cop after him named Carmelita. And so he takes a hit for her, and then he fakes amnesia. He's like, who the heck am I? What the heck is going on here? So that, because they have a thing for each other, those two, but they can never be together because she's a cop and he's a thief. So because he fakes amnesia, she's like, all right, well, this is our chance to get together. You're my partner. You're a Constable Cooper.
He doesn't remember he's a thief. Okay.
Well, he pretends that he doesn't remember that he's a thief. So he leaves the key to his gang, lets them get all the riches, and then he lives a peaceful life with the person that he cares about, leaving all this pride and, you know, self-importance behind him. And I think that that's really cool. And it's something that I'm able to recognize as a adult that I would have never, like, read between the lines on as a kid. And I think that that's really, really cool. And if I was gonna,
cool.
rate the story in that sense, I would rate it, like, super high, because even though, you know, it never goes, like, as hard as a super convoluted, like, JRPG plot that does all these crazy things. Like, it's still a relatively simple plot. It explores some really deep things, and in a way that's, like, can appeal to all audiences, you know? And, you know, some people might get more depth than others, but everyone can appreciate it, you know? And I think that that's a really creative way to go about that, you know?
Yeah, that's how I think you have to do it, because I think when a lot of people are making these stories, not necessarily stories for kids, but stories that are supposed to include kids, they kind of just make the stuff that's for kids simple and basic and boring, and oh, he beat the bad guy. And then they're like, okay, now we can work on the real story for the adults. But I don't think that's the right way to go about it, because the kids are playing this as one of their first games. It should still be special and good for them.
But
and that's
Mr. Krabs, what about the children?
That's why I think Mystery Dungeon and Ocarina of Time did so well. And I can actually say this about Mystery Dungeon, is I thought that game was incredible story-wise as a kid. It was just so, like, special and heartwarming and heartbreaking. But I haven't played it as an adult. But with Ocarina of Time, playing that as an adult, it was a great story as a kid, and it's a pretty good story as an adult too. Like, when I feel like with most stories that do that, like Pokemon, it's not that great as a kid, and then they're not even doing much for the adults either. It's, like, pretty basic.
Yeah.
Any way you look at it.
People kept on telling me the story of Scarlet and Violet was going to get great. And it does, like, surface level of some interesting things, but doesn't go all that deep. But also something worth considering when it comes to review scores and, like, comparing stories to one another. Something that does, like, delve into some slightly deeper subjects, or at least starts doing so, like Scarlet and Violet did there. Do we praise that because it did something better than, like, the last couple of games have done? Because its story was arguably better than previous games. Do we therefore praise this story? Because compared to the other ones, yes, I would say that it's better. But as a story, like, standalone analyzing just that without acknowledging the other games, it's like, wow, that's still... Huh?
Well, I mean, you can definitely praise the fact that they're improving. I don't know if you have to say the story is good, but you could be like, yes, this is what we want. This is better. This is improvement. That deserves credit. I don't think that makes a story good, though.
It's fair. It's fair enough there. But yeah, I mean...
So...
I was debating about whether I transition it back to, like, you know, changing opinions, like, as an adult in a positive way where I used to think about it negatively. I was thinking about transitioning back to the Assassin's Creed Unity example there, where it's like, when it first came out, I hated it. Nowadays, I actually really like it. Where
so you changed your opinion.
Where I changed my opinion. Where, but I guess we already kind of talked about that there, so...
Yeah, we kind of already said everything there is to say. I feel like about scoring in general, we're kind of on a completely different conversation now.
It was related thing. It was related to a story at the beginning, because we were talking about bias, essentially. That's what we were talking about there, where it's like, you know, I might be biased to like more deep stories, whereas what they have as their target audience, even though the majority of their audience is young adults in Pokemon's case, their target audience is probably still kids/family settings that everyone can get into it. Would I be wrong for judging this game's story from my lens as someone that appreciates someone deeper when that's not the target there? Especially, like, I get comments on my Pokemon essays all the time saying your opinion's invalid because you're not the target audience. How do you feel about stuff like that?
No, I don't think your opinion is invalid. Because first of all, you explained earlier you are the target audience, or at least part of it. I'm like, young adults play the hell out of Pokemon.
My demographic is the majority of the player base, but the actual target audience, like what they're trying to like sell it to, I would argue is something different.
Well, do you think that, I guess there's no way to answer this if you don't actually know the devs, but do you think the devs are even considering y'all at all, or are they just ignoring you, and if you play it, then you'd play it?
You know, that's kind of the impression that I got with them transitioning this game's protagonist to the most itty-bitty little kids in the entire series. Like, all the trainers that you play as in the previous games would look like they're either teenagers or young adults, you know, like in the range of anywhere from 12 to 18-ish, something like that, is what they would look like. Whereas, you know, these titles with Scarlet and Violet look like they literally just came out of preschool, is what the characters in it look like.
You think so? Well, like Nimona and all them?
No, not Nimona. The characters that you play as, like the player characters.
Oh, like the player character.
Nimona and Arven and stuff like that look like they're older. Like, they look like they're closer to the age range of, like, the Pokemon Black and White trainers, for example. But the actual characters that you play as, like the Avatar character, looks like they just came right out of preschool. And I feel like that was the Pokemon Company being like, huh, most of our player base are young adults instead of kids like we want it to be. Let's reinforce them like, hey, this game's not for you, it's for these guys. No, it might not be that, but when I saw what the characters in that game looked like, it kind of didn't feel so great, because I feel like one of the best things that you can have as an avatar character in a video game is this idea of being able to, like, apply yourself mentally onto this character, to, like, visualize yourselves in them, you know, in their shoes. I should clarify there. Like, that could be taken so far out of context.
Oh my god.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I wasn't even thinking that.
I realized after I said it.
Well, you could have just edited that out, but you know, okay, we move.
Nah, don't edit it out. Edit in a laugh track so that people know to laugh. No, let's not do that. But
no,
anyway,
you should do that. It'll be funny.
One of the most important things I find in games that you have an avatar character that you play as is being able to, like, mentally apply yourself onto that character, especially with games with a silent protagonist. You know, I feel like that's especially important in games where your character doesn't speak. Then it's especially the case of, like, this character, gameplay-wise and story-wise, is very much a blank slate. You have to, like, apply yourself onto them, and that becomes, like, their personality and who they are and stuff like that. So, I feel like the most important focus in a game where your core audience is going to be, like, young adults is maybe have the option for your avatar to look like something from that age range, so that it increases the capacity of being able to apply oneself onto that avatar character, and instead of feeling a little bit off of, like, huh, I'm playing as this, like, preschooler here. And I don't have any problems as, like, playing as, like, a tiny child in a game as long as it plays into the story in some way. Like, some good examples of this would be Undertale, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Like, that game kind of sucked, but, you know, but the aspect of you playing as a kid, like, hiding from these killer robots that are hunting you, that's cool, though. That itself is cool,
well,
you know?
I don't think having games we were playing as a kid is a problem in games for kids. Because I mean, then you could say the inverse.
Yeah.
What happened?
But,
okay.
you know.
Because I was going to say, then you could say the inverse, where it's like a kid playing a game, and if they made the avatar an adult, then a kid can't feel like they're in their shoes.
Yeah, but I'm just saying to have, like, the option to vary it. Like have it be like the Mii's, where you have, like, a height slider, for example, you know? Or something like that.
Yeah. Options are always better.
Like, it would be nice there where, you know, Pokemon is obviously marketed mostly towards kids, and that's probably why they had, you know, kids as, like, the characters that you play as in that. But I feel like they would benefit from acknowledging that the majority of their audience nowadays are young adults, and growing with their audience a little bit more so you can better apply yourself mentally onto this character, as seen in games like Pokemon Coliseum with the older main character. I think his name is Wes, I'm not 100% certain, but that guy, where he's a bit of an older protagonist because he grew with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so your original question was, are the commenters right in criticizing you for talking about the game's story when, you know, you're not the target audience, quote unquote?
And it kind of became about, like, how you rate a game based on, like, being able to apply yourself onto a silent protagonist or a character you make yourself.
Well,
in a way. How much does that influence your opinion?
And being able to play it, like, see the characters myself? Saying?
How much would it influence your rating of a game, the degree of value that you put onto it, and a potential score that you give it? How much is that influenced by the degree to which you're able to mentally apply yourself onto the avatar character that you're playing as, if it's a character that's like a silent protagonist, an avatar person, as opposed to like someone with a preset story?
I think that is very important, but I don't think the way the character looks applies to that too much for me.
Don't think so?
Not really. I mean, it might also be because I'm black and most games don't even let you pick a darker skin tone, so that might also be why I just kind of got used to it. But in general, that's not something I really pay too much attention to.
You want to hear a fun fact about that my use of history and video games professor brought up at one point? When it comes to games with avatars, there was some old like Tiger Woods golf game where you know, Tiger Woods golf, it's this game that literally the cover of the game has this famous black golfer, but the moment you load up the game and start the character creator, the first default option it gives you is a white guy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of just how it goes. It's funny though. Your games teacher, what did you say it was? What was the class?
The use of history in video games.
Your use of history in video games teacher sounds pretty funny and pretty smart.
He made all kinds of wacky analogies in that class. Like, another really funny one is we talked about like the potential uses of a given thing in a game. Like, he showed us a picture of like this old Atari console, for example. He's like, let's use a real world example. This console, what are the possible uses of it? Playing video games on it. Maybe using it to put things on. Maybe using it to hit your younger brother. Stuff like that. Like all these potential uses. So, yeah, he was
That's
pretty
good. Yeah, okay, we got off track again. Dude, talking to you is like talking to my brother. We get so far off track, we never even get to the point. Okay. Well, no, I didn't answer your question, actually. I did answer your question on that. But about the thing with core audience, I feel like it is fair for you to criticize that. Because the story, like
where
you are part of the audience. Sorry, I can't speak. You are part of the audience. Like, Pokemon games are they're rated E for everyone, right? That means everyone. Yeah. So it shouldn't be alienating anybody.
I feel like they designed themselves gameplay-wise and story-wise so that's something that anyone can understand. Like, it's something simple enough that anyone can get into. This is something that I was discussing a bit in the open world chapter that I was working on the video essay, where I talked about if I'm playing like a super complicated game like Xenoblade Chronicles X and using its overdrive mechanic, then it's like, wow, I can feel really rewarded by having to use like this really incredibly tricky to master mechanic in a really crazy way. I don't know if I phrased that all that well. I'm just gonna rephrase it. If I do something early, like out of order in Xenoblade Chronicles X, like I take on some super crazy enemy early, then I need to make use of like this really crazy game mechanic, Overdrive, that is probably one of the most complicated mechanics in the entire series, but also the most busted mechanic in the entire series. I need to make effective use of that. I need to apply my game knowledge. I need to use a lot of skill to get out on top here. Whereas in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you can do things in order with like the open world system, but coming out on top is oftentimes just going to come down to using the right type matchups and priority moves. Like, it's not as complex there, and as such, it's not going to have as much of a rewarding feeling. I'm not going to feel like I applied as much game knowledge and skill to doing that. But as I also say in, like, that script there, it's not necessarily a bad thing from the sense of this is meant to be a game that anyone can get into, and not just die-hard RPG fans that want to learn how to break a game, like with Xenoblade X, you know?
Well, I think the thing with that is, like, would them making it more complex, would that affect the casual audience's, like, experience at all? Like, would that hurt them?
It depends on what way you make it more complex. Like, with the case of Xenoblade Chronicles X's Overdrive, it's a very complicated mechanic, but you never need to use it. It's an optional thing. Like, if you take the time to learn. I never knew how that mechanic works for my entire first playthrough, and I got through the game without ever, like, properly learning it. It was only on, like, the playthrough on my channel that I took the time to really learn it and be like, wow, this is amazing, you know? So it depends on if you handled increased depth in a way where it's like, it's an option. You can take the time to, like, really break this game in half if you want to, but it's not ever going to be needed, as opposed to a game that's ludicrously complicated and you need to learn, like, all the mechanics of it inside and out to be able to get by. Something like that would definitely really hurt, like, the player base at large, if it is meant to be something that can appeal to all audiences, you know?
Well, I think it's like with the story thing I said earlier, they just have to find a way to make it more complex for people who want that, and also keep it simple for people who just want to play casually. Have to find a balance. And right now, there's no balance at all. It's just clearly going in one direction. Which I think is a huge problem for a game with such a, like, varied player base. So I think that's totally fair to criticize. And
just to make sure that this does, just to make sure to anyone listening that this does relate to review scores still, that's something worth criticizing, then you would say, and taking into consideration in scoring a game in that case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I do. I think so. Especially with the series that's been doing this over and over for so long. Like, even if this was their first game where they just, like, kind of alienated a part of their audience, that would still be a flaw, because that's part of your audience you're just not doing anything for. Even if they're not your core audience, they still are your audience. You gotta do something for them. If you're not, that's just another flaw.
And the way to, and we've determined that the way to handle that in storytelling is to have a story that anyone can understand, but other people might be able to, like, get more meaning from it, like adults playing games like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Ocarina of Time, or Sly Cooper that interpret more meaning later down the line, but still understanding the general premise and stuff as a kiddo. And gameplay-wise, it would be enacting mechanics that, like, anyone can get behind, like, the basic premise and be able to get through just fine, but it does have that extra depth there for those that want to seek it, but it's not required to get through the game. Is that, like, the sum of this section that we've basically done?
Yeah, more or less. And I think Mario Odyssey, or just Mario games in general, are the perfect example for that gameplay-wise. Because look, like I said earlier, those are games meant for kids too. The first game I ever played was Mario 64 at 4 years old. So you can definitely play that as a little kid, and I played it again at 19 and still had fun. The reason for that is because you can go into it and just do whatever you want. You don't have to do the hard missions. You don't have to do any of the complex stuff. You can do all the easy stuff and be totally fine. Just be satisfied with that. But if you want to do the complex missions, they're right there. They're not super out of the way. Just go do them. You can do whatever fits for you. It's perfect.
I think Mario Odyssey is a really good example about that, because, like, anyone can, you know, run around, jump, platform around places, but those that really want to learn a platforming game inside out can do, like, all these crazy happy jumps? Cappy jumps. And,
well, they are pretty happy.
I'm sure they are. I got mixed up with the name of my lizard for a second there for some reason. But those who that really want to, like, play it in a in-depth kind of way can absolutely do so. And that's That's really cool. So what do you say that in terms of rating games, that if we did cut it up into categories, that would go into the gameplay category or the creativity category?
I mean, it could potentially go in both. If it's creative, then creative aspect goes to the creativity category, but for the most part, that would go in gameplay.
The fact that it can appeal to all sorts of audiences.
Yeah, gameplay accessibility, for sure, is a gameplay thing. But, the case of Mario Odyssey, I think that's a perfect example, because even if you're a kid, like, those, like, moons that you can get, that everyone, oh, the moons are so easy to get, it's so trivial, bro. Like, as a kid, like, no, that's fun. It's still fun to just get moons. It doesn't matter if it's super easy, like, it's still enjoyable as hell as a kid. It's not like they're taking enjoyability away from the kids. Like, everyone can enjoy this, truly.
But then what about those that are complaining that it's too easy?
You know what?
You just
I think they just need to get over it in the case of Mario Odyssey, because you can completely ignore it. Like, why is it a problem for you?
If they're trying to 100% the game. Well, you have to collect moons to beat the game. You know?
Okay. Well, I'm not saying it's not still a flaw, but I'm like, I don't think that inhibits your enjoyment of the game, though. I think the Mario Odyssey has too many moons, which is a different thing. I don't think the moons being easy has anything to do with that. I think Mario Odyssey having way too many moons, yeah, that makes 100% annoying for sure. But just the moons being super easy, like, that doesn't affect you. If you want more complex gameplay, just go do the complex ones. That's what I did.
What about
yes.
What about if it was the case of a video game where like every challenge was super easy? Some hypothetical video game. I can't think of any examples right now.
I would say Kirby, but apparently that's not how Kirby is.
I haven't played a new Kirby game in forever, so I wouldn't know. Well, I guess I played like the Switch titles, but like the stuff between like the DS and 3DS era I never really touched. I kind of liked Forgotten Land, but it was fun. The freaking, the true final boss of Forgotten Land, if you don't go in there with a Healy item, like, it's darn near impossible. My goodness, that was so hard. I swear.
Okay, if I ever play Forgotten Land, I got a new challenge. Try to do it.
The true final boss. Once I figured out that I could have like a Healy item, it's such a long boss, and it'll just clip you in like so many instances, and before you know it, like your health's out there. Once I figured out I could bring in a Healy item, it's like, okay, now I got this, because I've essentially got like 2 full health bars at this point. But going through that entire boss and getting like clipped for little bits of my HP here and there, I could not do it with like 1 HP bar. Such pain. And you have to do it after like some 10 boss rush or something like that. I don't remember how many bosses it was. It's ridiculous.
That's pretty insane.
So that was a good example of having like a game that can appeal to like, you know, kids that want a simple gameplay experience with like simple Kirby gameplay. But here's something ludicrous that you don't need to do to beat the game. There is like an easier final boss. But if you want like the ultimate true final boss, my goodness, I felt like I was playing Elden Ring, not Kirby.
Okay. Have you actually played Elden Ring?
Yeah, I beat every boss and I 100%ed that game.
Oh shit. Oh, it's that hard. Okay.
Yeah. I have every Steam achievement.
Cool, then. It's actually okay. That is actually a great example of the game going to both sides of the spectrum, polar opposites.
It was insane.
Elden Ring and Kirby.
Elden Ring is also another really good example of being able to appeal to like various different like groups that are able to get through it. A lot of people have called for difficulty modes in Soulsborne games for a long time, but I feel like Elden Ring was able to strike like a really good balance without difficulty modes, because there's all kinds of mechanics that you can employ. And this is something that I actually bring up in the open world chapter of the Scarlet and Violet video essay, where it's like, if you want to take on some boss with like a massive Destructo magic beam, if you want to take it on with like a clone of yourself, which in my case happened to be Senator Armstrong and his nanomachines, or if you just want to take on I turned my avatar into Senator Armstrong later. That's neither here nor there. Or if you just want to fight them with like your bare fists and like no armor or anything like that, you can do it. Like you can augment the game around like your preferred level of difficulty. Like, not by going into a menu and doing difficulty modes. You do have to go around the world and find these things, like the Destructo Beam spell, or, you know, the flask stuff, the crystal tears that'll give you that infinite magic. or the mimic tier, stuff like that. You would have to seek out these things that make it easier, but that also makes them more rewarding to use in that sense, is that you sought them out rather than going into a menu to just like switch it to easier. Like, you still feel rewarded for doing that and don't feel like you just took the easy way out. And in that sense, it can also appeal to like a more broad audience, because those that want to like try hard can absolutely go in and try hard with like bare minimum and like baby rage at you in YouTube comments because you weren't try harding like them. Or you can use like these mechanics that you want to use and like get through it at like your own pace, like kind of make your own adventure. And from the perspective of it being an open world game, I feel like handles that really, really well. So I feel like in terms of open world games applying to a broad audience and being able to have something that it can give some meaningful substance to it that it can give to anyone for anyone to enjoy, that's something that's actually seen in a game like that, which I think is really interesting.
That's
I would
cool.
I would absolutely praise that game for that. There are things I'd criticize about it for sure, but I would definitely praise it for that.
Uh-oh, we're about to get into the Elden Ring video essay here in the podcast.
No, I don't know if I'd ever do one on that game. I don't think I have the time for it. Maybe one day, I don't know. That game is already oversaturated in content. I don't think there's any point in me doing that.
Yeah. We got far away from your original question. I think it was, how would I rate a game that is purely appealing to people who want easier stuff?
Or games that are just, like, very set in, like, this difficulty. Or maybe something that's just, like, something that should seem like it appeals to a broad audience, but is just, like, mind-numbingly easy for anyone that's not, like, 5.
But do you have, like, an example?
Maybe if I scroll through, like, all the playthroughs I've done, I can come up with something, maybe.
Well, okay. I think that kind of goes into gameplay and difficulty, because it's like, the game's job is to set you up for what to expect, which Dark Souls does very well, I hear. It's like, okay, this is supposed to be a game that's complicated, and then you get into it and it's super easy. Like, the game I always think of is Mega Man X, which isn't necessarily easy, but it's a game, because, you know, Mega Man games, you can fight the bosses in any order, right? But there is technically a order you're quote-unquote supposed to do it in, but you could just say screw that and do whatever you want. The first boss is easy. The second boss is kind of hard. The third boss is the hardest boss in the game. Fourth boss is easy. And the fifth boss is like, So it's just like going up and down all over the place. Like, you would expect the last boss to be the hardest one in the game. You would expect all the easy ones to be right at the start. But it doesn't live up to that at all. It's just all over the place. So in that case, I think that is a flaw with the difficulty scaling. If it's supposed to be like a game that you would expect to be more complicated and they set you up to think that and don't deliver, that is a flaw.
Okay. All these things that we've ended up chatting about do kind of pertain to reviews. The initial topic that we started, like, this whole discussion about was, like, the degree of credibility when it came to, like, reviews, how much esteem we should hold them in. And then, like, the second half of this discussion has now basically become, to what degree of importance do we hold these various aspects of games in our reviews? So,
yeah,
you know, they've been related topics, but yeah, this has been, like, two kind of related topics that we've kind of delved into.
Yeah, I feel like this has been two separate podcasts.
Yeah.
Also, looking at my game rating doc, I went ahead and actually opened it. So there are the 5 main categories, and I toyed with the idea of adding another 2 like subcategories, where the 5 main parts can equal 90% of the total score, and the 2 extra parts, 2 extra parts equal a total of 10%, so 5% each. And those 2 extra parts are...
Just slam down a desk?
No. I tried to move my elbow and accidentally hit my laptop. Okay.
No need to get so violent.
So the 2 categories are 100% completion and extras, which I think are important. Especially extras, because I feel like in games, when was the last time you watched a review and people actually factored in the extra modes into the review? Almost never. But like, that's a part of the game. That should be factored in.
Kirby games are a really good example of that, where they'll typically have like mini games that you can do on the side. Like, there's a Dreamland Deluxe that's coming up here, and one of the trailers that they released recently also showed like, hey, there's all these mini games that you can do on the side as well, completely unrelated to the main game, and they can be played up to 4 player. And that's a thing that, you know, Kirby games will often do there. That's a cool set of extras, for example.
And then that should be factored in, the extra stuff, but it never is. But the thing is, I feel like both those subcategories could just fit into gameplay. So
Yeah.
the reason I gave them their own categories, because I feel like, they're important in their own way, in separate ways from the gameplay category, but they probably should just go in there.
But yeah, they can be important things to talk about, because even if it doesn't, appeal to everyone, there are going to be those out there that do want to know about that, because they 100% games. And if your game is something like Assassin's Creed 1, where those who want to 100% your game have to go around the world getting hundreds of flags and have like no indication on the map of where the remaining flags are, and the game can straight up bug out and have flags despawn and have it be impossible to 100% due to glitches, then that's definitely something important to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. But even then again, that could just go into gameplay. I think part of it came from me thinking about what makes a game go that extra mile. Because I feel like, to me, there are some games that are like great, like, oh, it's a 9 out of 10. But then there are certain games where it's like, this is a 9 out of 10 with something extra, And like, what is that extra? I think part of it is 100% completion and extra modes, just extra stuff in general. Like just that extra little polish.
Would you ever dock points off of a game for having too much content?
Okay, the thing about that, I wouldn't dock points off for having too much content if the content is good. Like, if it's good and it's fun and it got as much care as the rest of the content, then no. But if it's just like an Assassin's Creed type thing where it's just there to be there, or Breath of the Wild Koroks, then yeah, I would.
I would also add another word into that being unique for for me personally, if I'd, dock points. Or unique, if I would dock points, that is. Where the additional content is actually unique. Because the first thing that comes to mind for me, for like too much content or too much of the same content, is Fire Emblem Three Houses. That game is a 70-hour JRPG with 4 different routes. Well, technically 3 different routes, but one of them branches like a second time. And the thing is, the only thing that's actually majorly different is the time skip. And the game starts out with 12 chapters in pre-time skip, and then post-time skip is 10 chapters for Blue Lions and Golden Deer, 8 chapters for whatever the heck, the Black Eagles, if you go against Edelgard, and like 6 chapters if you go with Edelgard. So no matter which route you do, it's less chapters than in the original game, in like the pre-time skip. And the pre-time skip is basically the exact same across like all 4 routes, with very slight differences. The only differences being the characters that are experiencing the story. Nothing actually different happens, apart from maybe like some side quests or paralogs, something like that. So, if you want the full story of this game, you need to play a 70-hour JRPG 4 times, except the first 40 to 50 hours are the same each time. The initial first 40 to 50 hours are the same, just so you can experience a different 20 to 30 hours. And sometimes that post-time skip isn't even that different in and of itself. Like, I found when I was doing Golden Deer, that the Golden Deer post-time skip was literally just the story of Black Eagles going against Edelgard, but with Claude slapped into it. And then fighting Nemesis at the end. But apart from that, it's basically the exact same story, with like some different characters and stuff like that. It's like, what the heck? Well, so I got tired of playing Three Houses, because while that has a lot of content, and people are constantly putting it on this pedestal of like, look how much content and replayability there is, it's not unique enough to warrant like playing through it. And because of that, and because it also says like, if you want the full story, like, or it doesn't say to you, but it implies to you, if you want the full story, go experience all these routes. And it's just all this repetitive, like, mess. Like, I would definitely dock points for that, because while it is a lot of content, it's not a lot of unique content. It's just a lot of padding.
Yeah, so, well, that's the perfect way to put it. I'm glad you specified. You put it in a better way than I did. Unique content instead of in good content. It has to be both unique and good.
Yes.
I would hold it up to the same standards as any other part of the game. If it's a second playthrough, and they expect you to do this second playthrough to get the whole story, then yeah, it should be unique and it should still be good. So, like, I think that is a flaw of Three Houses, even though I haven't played the game. It's not a definitive opinion, but that sounds like a flaw to me.
It was another flaw that I found in Nier Replicant when I played through that. It doesn't make you play through the entire game again, just the second half. And gameplay-wise, and in terms of what happens, second playthrough, it's the exact same thing, but this time you get cutscenes that recontextualize things and frame it as, like, you might actually be the bad guy. Or, like, maybe not the bad guy, but, like, you're not actually that great, is what it recontextualizes things to. And with those additional cutscenes, it's like, whoa, that's
let
actually...
me ask you this.
That's actually pretty cool. But then third playthrough is exactly the same, and it's like, come on, and then it expects you to do a fourth, and... Anyway.
How much are these games, how, like, replayable are they? Are they just really repetitive? It's the same exact missions. There's not that much room for variety or creativity.
3 Houses?
Like either game.
What, Nier Replicant?
Hey, between 3 Houses or Nier Replicant, are either of them like replayable games?
I'd say like now that I've done all the routes of 3 Houses, and now that I've seen like the first half of that game 4 times now, I could not envision myself coming back to that. I feel like I would lose my mind. Nier Replicant, I could see myself potentially, but, you know, I would have to put up with, like, doing the second half, like, over and over again. Like, that one I could see as, like, a maybe years down the line. Or if I'm playing it with someone, like family or something like that, and it's like, here's an interesting game that you might be intrigued by, but I don't want to touch 3 Houses with, like, a 10-inch pole at this point.
Well, the reason I ask is because I'm going to go back to Mario 64 because apparently that's a great game for examples. Mario 64 notoriously is a game that after you beat a level or die, it'll kick you out and have you re-enter the level from the beginning. And a lot of people don't like that because it's kind of repetitive. But the thing is, Mario 64 is actually really fun to replay through. And I think it would actually be worse if they didn't make you replay the levels over and over because you would get to experience that.
It sounds kind of like... It sounds kind of like the Soulsborne boss approach, where you just do it over and over again until you eventually succeed. And each time you start to gain like more and more knowledge about the level or the boss in a Soulsborne game, and learn their patterns, and eventually get like adept at it until you can do it confidently.
Exactly, and in Mario 64 levels, you learn more about each level until eventually you know every single level like the back of your hand. You actually will get better at the game than you definitely would have otherwise. If you just played through it once and then moved on, you wouldn't be nearly as good. Because every time you go through a level, you're like, oh, well, let me try this thing, or let me try that, or let me look over here. It makes you want to like, experiment and do things differently every time and learn. So the reason I say that is because that's a game that forces you to replay levels over and over, where it's actually fun. It's actually part of the game. It's actually part of what makes it good. And it's designed to be replayed over and over. So if a game is forcing you to replay content to get the full experience, and it's not meant to be replayed, it's like a direct contradiction.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you define it's not meant to be replayed. Because if it's locking story content behind that, then it is sort of meant to be replayed. But it doesn't serve enough differences from what you've done before.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. If they expect you to replay it to get like the full experience, then it should be made to be especially replayable. And if it's not, that's kind of an issue.
Yeah, it should absolutely change more things that make it a more unique experience compared to just feeling like you're playing the exact same game through again, like I was feeling with 3 Houses.
Yeah, and again, I haven't played either of these games, but that does sound like padding.
Yeah. The second playthrough of Nier Replicant wasn't too bad because I got like all this recontextualization and I was intrigued, and at least the second half wasn't too long. And the third one added like a teeny bit more, but like barely anything, and I was just like, oh, come on, by the third one.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like they're giving you enough. It should actually be fun to replay the areas like Metroid. Going back to old areas, like that's the game's staple, because it's fun to go back to old areas that you've been to, because now you have new stuff, you have new techniques, you know more about the game and the world.
There's new stuff that you can access.
And new stuff you can do, like it's built in. And any game that, I shouldn't say forces, but any game that encourages you to replay it should have replayability built in.
It should definitely take that into account into its game design. That's what you mean then.
Well, yeah.
Demonstrate some sort of value for repeat playthroughs.
Yes. Well,
and increase
that's the smarter way to say it. Correct.
That was definitely something I know.
I'm glad I've got you here to rephrase what I'm saying for me.
It was definitely something that I really noticed with Xenoblade Chronicles X, where it's like, going through it casually. It's like, I had fun, I learned the basics of the game, and I'm going through, and then, like, repeat playthrough years later, I take the time to really learn mechanics like overdrive, and it's like, holy crap, it's like I'm playing a completely different video game now, mechanically. This is crazy, and I had so much fun.
And if that game would have, like, encouraged you to replay it some kind of way by, like, locking an extra ending or, I don't know, something, it wouldn't have been bad. It would have actually been fun.
Maybe. I don't know how I would have felt about, like, replaying it immediately on the spot after. Like, games like Near Replicant or Three Houses encourage.
Okay, so maybe that was not a good example.
Yeah, maybe not quite. Because then what's to stop you from, just playing it in the exact same way that you did, like, the first playthrough and what you're used to. This was me, like, coming back years later down the line and being like, let's, like, really get into it this time. Differentiate things from years ago, you know? Was the case. Or, I feel like Breath of the Wild is also another really good example of replayability. Like, both in terms of,
I mean, if you insist, you know. No,
like,
continue.
There's definitely grievances that I have with that game, but its gameplay is, like, very, very praiseworthy. And one of the things that surprisingly is super praiseworthy, I say surprisingly because it would have been something the developers would have never intended, is through its glitches. Like, that is a game that runs very stably, like, if you're playing super casually and not trying to break it in half. But if you take the time to really learn that engine, you can absolutely break that game in half, and it seems like one of the glitchiest games on the console. Like, in terms of skill-wise, it might just be, like, the video game that I might be best at in terms of, like, what I know about how to break the engine into, you know? So, playing it casually when it first released, it's like, okay, that was pretty fun, I enjoyed going through casually. And then playing it on this channel, taking the time to really learn the game, learning the game's glitches as opposed to learning the game's, you know, built-in mechanics like Overdrive with Xenoblade X. It was like I was playing a completely different video game, and I was having so much fun. It was great, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing is cool. I mean, I guess it's not built in, though. So can you really consider that a plus of the game?
I'd say just more so games that have a super high skill ceiling, where it can appeal to any audience and anyone can play and get into it. But it has, like, a very high skill ceiling, whether that be in an unintended way, like Breath of the Wild with its glitches, or in an intended way with Xenoblade Chronicles X with its overdrive, for example.
Okay.
That's definitely something praiseworthy.
Yeah, I would agree.
I would definitely factor that into my score of games.
Your score. Oh, yeah, scores. That's right. That's what we were talking about.
Score.
Score. Well, I think that's pretty much all I had to say. Got any more questions you want to ask me?
What's the meaning of life?
42.
The good old tried and true.
I've never actually read that book, but I want to.
I remember reading it for a book report in grade school. I guess one thing that I can ask that sort of relates is, what is your favorite game of all time, and what would you rate it out of 10? Why?
Super Mario World 9. And
okay.
I would rate that 9 because, first of all, it's an amazing platformer if you just play it straight. But the thing that makes it a 9 is the amount of freedom the game gives you, because there are so many branching paths through levels, and literally, thanks to Star World, you can straight up just go beat the boss after you finish the first world. You can just go fight Bowser if you're good enough. Like, actually beat those Star Road levels, which I guess a lot of people won't be, but you can do it. The game gives you so much freedom. There's like a level in the game where you can go and just get infinite power-ups. You want to go get infinite powers? Go ahead and do it. You don't want to? Then you don't have to. It literally just lets you play it however you want to play it, and no matter how you do it, it's super fun. Even the main intended way is fun. It's just a game that doesn't constrict you, and I love that.
Gotcha, but not perfect, flawless, and therefore not a 10.
Not quite perfect. I haven't played the game. Well, actually, that's not true.
I haven't played the game. I just heard about it from a friend. No.
No. I was about to say I haven't played the game. I was gonna say I haven't played it recently, but that isn't. Hey man, I'm not a Persona fan. I've actually played my favorite games. I have played it kind of recently, but I haven't really played it with like a critical eye in a while. I just play it every now and then for fun. But the thing is, the game is very slippery physics wise. I hate the mechanic where if you get hit, your main power up, because like in the game you can store power ups.
Mhm.
You can like store one at a time, and if you get hit, the one that you have stored will fall from the sky, and if you don't catch it, it's gone forever.
Oh, I didn't
I
know
hate that
about
mechanic. It's so annoying.
I just assumed it was like the later games where you can press a button and then it drops.
You can also press a button if you want, but if you get hit, it'll drop automatically.
That's
You
silly.
have no say. That's pretty silly. There were other things about it that were minor drawbacks, but for the most part, I think it's a pretty amazing game. I just feel like the main thing that holds it back from being a 10 isn't so much flaws. It's just like it doesn't really have as many things going for it as other games. But yeah, what about? I already know your favorite game. You already said it on here.
Yeah, it was Roller Coaster Tycoon World.
Yeah, Roller Coaster Tycoon World. So that game's obviously a 10. We don't have to
yeah.
talk about that.
No, that
But
one.
your second favorite game,
that one's an
Explorers
11.
of Sky. An 11.
Yeah, I changed the
But
whole rating
Explorers of-
system specifically because of how good Roller Coaster Tycoon World was.
Well, some games are just that good, you know.
Yeah,
Well, not
absolutely.
really. Only Roller Coaster Tycoon World. That's the
Yeah.
only one.
That one right there. Oh my goodness.
But what would you rate Explorers of Sky and why?
Like, as we were talking about earlier, about the sense of like, I've never played a perfect game, but like 10 has to be attainable. There has to be like some sort of frame of reference where this is attainable. So from that perspective, like, I might say on paper something like 10 from the reference of like, this has to be obtainable. If I'm saying like 10 is like an absolutely perfect game, I'd give it like an 8 or something like that. Like, while its soundtrack and story are so amazing, like, its gameplay is just, it could use so much improvement that they did improve in later games, but it could just use like so much improvement there. If I was gonna rate like the individual aspects, I would do like story 9.5, music 9, gameplay, oh gosh, 6 or something, but not,
okay, 6.
which is like 6 in the sense of like, hey, that's pretty alright. Not in the sense of like IGN giving something a 6 where it's like, oh, that's terrible. You know, that kind of point of reference for a 6 where it's like, it's pretty alright, but it could use some significant improvement. Art style and aesthetics, probably like, would I give it a 10? Maybe. 10 or a 9.5 on that. It's so charming. It's like such an incredible use of sprite work in a game, and just like sprite-based, or pixelated environments and stuff. It's so beautiful. Stuff like that is how I'd probably rate individual aspects, though. But yeah, it's probably something like that.
Okay.
You know, Roller Coaster Tycoon World would be 1s across the board.
1s across the board. Oh, it gets a 1 in even creativity. That's crazy.
Okay, maybe I'd change it all to 0.
Oh.
No.
Well, you can give stuff to 0.
Yeah, it's my rating.
Yeah.
I can give it whatever I want.
Yeah, Super Mario World and Explorers of Sky. Well, this is the part where we bicker. My game is better than your game.
No, my game's better than your game. This is awful.
No. My game is cool and your game is not cool.
I'm gonna go downvote you on Reddit because you disagreed with me.
Well,
I'm gonna dislike your YouTube videos because you said something that mildly irritates me.
It's taking it too far. Can't dislike my YouTube videos that I don't have yet. How dare you?
I'll dislike this video that you star in.
Just your video. You're hurting you more than me.
I think, I'm not 100% certain, I'm no like YouTube algorithm guru, but I think as long as you drop a rating, like it still counts as interacting with the video and it still like helps it in the algorithm and stuff.
Really?
I think. I'm not 100% certain.
If you rate your own video, you get money.
So I think all those people that see like the title and thumbnail of my Pokemon essays alone, click on it just to dislike it and leave a mean comment about how wrong I am. Like, I think I get stuff from them. Like, I get some ad revenue. I get, like, brownie points in the algorithm that says that they click the video, they interact with the ratings, and they interact with the comments. YouTube likes that. So, thank goodness for that small group of people that hates my guts. My title and thumbnail.
I'm surprised watch time doesn't have that much of an effect.
Watch time does have a big effect, but a lot of the big factors are just like, how much did the user interact with the content in question? Clicking counts as an interaction, watch time counts as an interaction. Rating counts as an interaction, and comments count as an interaction. And that's why things like polls on YouTube, like the whole community polls thing, are as busted as they are. Because someone...
If they interact, it'll do stuff?
because there's like extra opportunity to interact with it by like voting on things. So like recently, I'm gonna start Pokemon Coliseum in the near future on the channel, and so I made a poll in the Discord server where people can vote on like which starter Pokemon I'm gonna go with. They're like pseudo starter Pokemon, Bayleaf, Quilava, or Croconaw. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna base the results off of that. But I'll make an announcement on like the community tab on my YouTube saying that like that's a poll going on. Come on down to the Discord server. And I was initially gonna post a meme, and then I was like, wait, image polls are broken. Why don't I just make it an image poll? Even though I'll state at the bottom, like, this poll won't actually count. Like, this will just be like a tiebreaker if need be. I haven't actually checked it. I posted a few days ago. What is it at?
The Cyndaquil one was in the lead last time I checked. A lot.
Oh, yeah. So, if I go look on Discord, the current votes in Discord are 11 for Croconaw, 5 for Quilava, and 3 for Bayleaf. Oh, I guess you take away 1 from each, because I started 1 for each. So that would be like 10, 14, 16 total votes in the Discord server. On YouTube, 1.2k votes on this, even though I said, like, this isn't going to determine it. I'm going to determine it by, like, the Discord server first and foremost. Is the case, just use this for a tiebreaker.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't see that this isn't gonna determine it part, so I'm actually gonna join the angry mob that comes to get you. This is unacceptable.
So
okay, like, but that actually explains a lot.
Anyway, this is completely unrelated at this point, but yeah.
Oh yeah, we're just going at this point.
But yeah, the more opportunities to interact your content has, like, and the more interactions it gets, the more brownie points in the algorithm it gets. So, like, you know, other things, like other posts of mine aren't going to get anywhere near that much interactions, but like this random poll about something that I explicitly stated this isn't going to be the decider, 1.2k votes, it's like, wow, okay. Neat.
Mm-hmm. Well, you need to learn more about gaming the algorithm system so that you can teach me about it.
For when you get into YouTube stuff there. Are there any plans for when you're going to start that? Anything that I'd be able to link in the description of this video?
I mean, you can link my Twitter.
The platform that you said don't ever go on.
Well, I'm not on there that much, but like that's where people interact with me the most. Yeah, Twitter sucks. Just use Twitter to keep up with your friends, and that's it. Like people that you think are cool.
Yeah.
So I should probably unfollow you then. Actually. I'm messing.
Oh yeah, speaking about like following people that you think are cool, this is something that I was actually thinking about talking about like much earlier in the discussion, but you know, the discussion went all over the place talking about the regard that we have for review scores. One of the things that you had mentioned was like going to some creator that you know and trust and stuff like that, and taking their review score as the answer for the quality of this game. How, like, to what degree would you determine, like, who is trustworthy? Like, who do you, whose opinions you would respect and stuff? Because I feel like this is something that I've delved into a little bit with some of my, technology and AI video essays on the channel before, where one of the big problems nowadays in the online sphere is how all these platforms will try to maximize your time on the platform by just showing you stuff that you already agree with, and therefore, like, you're gonna want to stick around there longer and, you know, like, really vibe with that. And sometimes they'll purposefully just, like, sprinkle in a little bit of stuff that you disagree with to, like, rile you up, make you mad, and then you have to, like, get all angry about it and stuff. And then, and then that's gonna keep you on the platform longer as well. And then it'll give you, like, more stuff that you agree with to, like, comfort you and stuff. But this has, like, some drastic consequences of creating these echo chambers of views that you already agree with, rather than, like, broadening your perspective with other ideas. And
Twitter?
What?
Twitter?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I heard weirder at first.
I said Twitter both times. I might have said it weird the first time.
But, you know, it creates these echo chambers, essentially, and it can therefore become really hard for people to get exposed to other ideas. And in the few cases where they do, it'll seem like this drastic thing that how can anyone possibly believe this? Clearly the majority believes this other thing because they've been exposed to more of the other thing. So those that hold reviews in, like, a high regard from, like, certain creators might do so because it was part of, like, that echo chamber bubble rather than something outside of outside of that sphere of influence, do you feel like that could potentially be a problem when it comes to going to certain creators for their opinions specifically in regards to reviewing games?
Well, I think first of all, you shouldn't hold one creator's opinion. You shouldn't let that dictate your opinion.
Yeah.
In fact, it can just be something you hold in regard. Maybe it can influence your opinion, but it shouldn't dictate it. But I think you asked earlier what like determines whether or not they're trustworthy, and I think a big part of that is honesty and consistency. Like, you can't say a game is good for one reason, then immediately play another game and say, "Oh, it's bad" for the same reason. Like, you got to be consistent.
It depends. It depends on how it's applied within the game.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it broadly.
Okay, because one of the examples that I use in the open world aspect of the Scarlet and Violet video essay is the idea of level scaling. There's one reviewer saying level scaling is bad in Bethesda games, so therefore it would be bad in Pokemon, whereas Bethesda games are action games rather than turn-based RPGs. So, examples like that, where it's like, the context in which it's applied matters as well.
Well, even in that case, if someone's like, oh, well, what's another example? Like Breath of the Wild. Which one is Breath of the Wild more similar to, would you say, with its level scaling?
How, what? Breath of the Wild has level scaling?
Yeah, as you progress through the games, enemies get tougher. Like, they get stronger weapons and all that.
Oh yeah, I guess that there's like, I know that there's the secret EXP system that determines like the buffs that you can get on weapons and stuff. Does that determine like this generation of random enemies as well, like how tough they are?
I think it's about how many shrines you do.
Huh. Because I know that the secret EXP and leveling up system is one that determines the drops of weapons that have attributes on them and stuff, or just equipment in general.
Well, let's just say that.
But apart from that, I hadn't heard of it.
I think, well, let's just say Breath of the Wild is most similar to, what did you say, Bethesda games? Let's say it's most similar to Fallout. Fallout's leveling system or whatever. So if I play Fallout and I say, oh, this game sucks because it has this leveling system, it's terrible, and then I go play Breath of the Wild, level scaling, sorry. And then I go play Breath of the Wild and I'm praising it for the same thing, which again, we're pretending to have the exact same level scaling, just for argument's sake. Like, that would be weird, because I'm like, well, the level scaling, they're both the same, they're both doing the same thing, serving the same purpose, so why is one good and one bad? If you're gonna say that, you gotta explain what the difference is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just looks like you're being inconsistent. That's the kind of thing you can't do. And with honesty, I don't know if you ever heard of King K. Surely you've seen some of his videos floating around. No, the YouTuber.
I've not.
No. Oh my god. And you call yourself a video essay guy.
Video essay guy.
Yeah. A video essayer. Just add ER to the end of it. You do with YouTuber. But yeah, he's very honest about how he does his process. He's very open about it, like, oh, I go about it like this. And when people will ask him, because I not cut myself off, but one of the things that he'll do is he tends to, what is the word I'm looking for? He tends to lighten the games for not being immersive. And a lot of people will say, well, let me not cut myself up again.
Lighten a game?
That means like he'll bash it.
Okay.
He'll bash a game for not being immersive. But then sometimes he'll play another game and he'll be like, oh, and people will be like, oh, well, this game's not immersive. Why does this one get a pass? What the hell? And people will say, oh, well, why are you looking at Mario and being like, oh, Mario? I cannot speak. Let me think about what I'm trying to say. Hold on.
Looking at Mario and being like, black.
Because I'm trying to think of two different points at the same time, and they're getting intertwined.
Well, don't cross the streams if you learned anything from Ghostbusters.
That's funny. I was thinking that same thing. People will say, well, how are you looking at Mario and mad that it's not immersive? Like, Mario's not supposed to be realistic. And it'll be like, well, I'm not looking at it to be realistic. I just want it to be immersive. It just needs to be cohesive and fit together. I need to be able to put myself in this world without something taking me out of it. Well, a lot of people thought that he was kind of contradicting himself, oh, why would you want this to be immersive? It's not realistic at all. And he's like, no, it doesn't have to be. just has to do this other thing. But because he was honest in explaining himself, that like I can completely understand that. But before, I was honestly with those commenters, like, what are you talking about, dude? It's stupid. But now I'm on his side, like, no, that makes sense.
Mhm.
That's another aspect of it. It's just honesty and transparency.
Mhm. When it comes to like the initial first thing that we were talking about, when it came to like big platform reviewers, how honest do you feel they are?
I don't know how honest they are, but they're not transparent at all. I'll tell you that. Nah, I'm sure some of them. The thing is, people say reviews are paid, and I think some of them are paid. But in general, I don't think it's that they're paid. It's that people don't want to give an unfavorable review because they'll lose access, or they're afraid that they will.
Mhm.
So they'll like rate, say, a Nintendo game higher because they want to still be able to report on Nintendo with like inside information and all that stuff.
Mhm. Yeah,
I think that plays a role. So
yeah,
that's another reason I don't really care for IGN.
leave a positive impression on, you know, the ones keeping the lights on potentially there, as well as, you know, not potentially also not putting themselves in hot water with, you know, putting out a review that people are going to hate them for. Like, one of the things I was mentioning earlier is I feel like a lot of big reviewers will rate games based on how close it is to what they expect it to be, / like how close the review is to the way that they expect like general audiences will find it is also another extension of that. Because like if you're making arguments and giving scores that confirm people's beliefs, then they'll hold you in higher regard. But if you're making arguments and claims that discredit people's beliefs, then they'll, you know, be like, wow, that sure sucks. So I feel like a lot of these companies that will consistently rate big releases positively, and this is something that we see all the time with things like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Cyberpunk 2077, both cases of like very broken games that got glowing reviews before they came out, but likely with the expectation of like, you know, this is a big release, there's a big established player base for it, people are probably gonna like it, let's rate it generally positively, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know why we're just bashing like big gaming outlets, but that's another reason I don't really mess with them.
Yeah, I don't hold them all in all that high of regard myself.
Yeah, that's kind of a shame, because that would be convenient if you could just look at what the big gaming outlets say and at least use that as some kind of guide. But you can't even use it as a general guide. What they say is just worthless most of the time.
Yeah, unfortunately, when it comes to very big review platforms, the way that I feel a lot of the time is like, the higher the score, the bigger the release it is. That's what it indicates to me.
Bigger the release it is.
Yeah.
Hold on a second right here. I don't know about you, but I consider big reviewers people with 18.7 subscribers. Oh my god, forget it. God, I was gonna say 18.7k subscribers or more and make a joke that you're a big reviewer. So I'm ignoring your opinion, but I'm tired.
A whole 18.7 subscribers.
My brain no work anymore.
Oh man. One of those kinds of days, huh?
I mean, it's because I've been thinking so much. We've been having this conversation. It's like my brain fried, and because I'm actually really tired today. I didn't get much sleep last night, but ran out of juice. What happened?
There was just one last idea that I wanted to get into that's sort of related, something that I feel like is worth mentioning. When it comes to that whole idea of holding reviews in like higher esteem if there's something that agree with you, or they're what was I going to expand that into? Well, just generally if there's something that you agree with, and if they're not, then like discredit them, then they're not all that great when it comes to big platforms. Something that I notice sometimes with the comments of my video essays is not just, you know, some people hating my guts, but also like the polar opposite that I see more frequently is people that put me up on like some pedestal, like by putting out this video essay that said that this wasn't all that great, like this is like gospel now. And I don't really like either or is a thing, because this was I forget what video I was watching that talked about this in regards to like some more political channels where there are some political channels that'll show just evidence that, you know, people a certain way might like to believe in because, you know, that's what corresponds to their beliefs, but doesn't encompass the whole picture. Like, I believe the example in this one video was this channel that was showing this one study that said, like, oh, the ice caps aren't melting. These glaciers are actually expanding. When it was a study that showed, like, yes, this one glacier is expanding, but doesn't encompass the whole picture that generally ice is melting rather than expanding and ocean levels are going up, you know? Where, you know, a lot of channels will very specifically choose, like, information to show just because they know that it'll get them impressions, click rate, and people really vibing with them. Because their content is confirming beliefs that people want to believe. Something that I fear sometimes with my Pokemon video essays is that there might be a lot of people tuning into them, not because they genuinely want an in-depth analysis of these games, from my perspective, but because they want something that confirms their beliefs that they already had. And I don't want people going into video essays of mine with that kind of perspective. Like, and it's something that I might, you know, emphasize. I'm debating about whether I'm going to have a note about it or not in the Scarlet Violet essay. Something along the lines of Ezio's speech from Assassin's Creed 2, where it's like, hey, don't even just take my word for it. Like, look into it yourself, namely in terms of, like, math when it comes to, like, nat deck stuff during one specific aspect there, where it's like, hey, don't even just blindly take my word for it. If something seems off to you, look into it, whip out the calculator like I did, look into things and do some research rather than, you know, waiting for someone to potentially confirm these beliefs to you. Like, I appreciate you tuning into this content, but don't, you know, take this as, like, the end-all, be-all, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of people that will seek out certain content specifically because it, you know, confirms a belief that they want to believe in. Like, there'll be a lot of people that might be like, wow, I really don't like this game. I want to, like... And some people that might not really like this game might be like, huh, I wonder why that is, because I can't properly put it into words and articulate. I might look to, say, one of my videos and be like, oh, yeah, I get it now. You put it into words pretty well. But there are also some people that are just like, man, this sucks. I hate it so much. I want it to be reinforced, and might seek out videos like mine there. And I don't really want people to go in with that mentality, you know? Like, I just want
and you know what? People actually do the inverse of that a lot, where they really like a game and they want to see a review where people will praise it. That's why I feel like I guess you don't watch a lot of video essays, but a lot of the ones I watch, people are so hesitant to criticize anything. Sorry, what's up?
I've actually started watching, like, a bit more video essays. Sometimes on gaming related stuff, sometimes all kinds of other topics, and it intrigues me how other people handle their video essays and what kind of, like, ideas and concepts I can incorporate into mine. So I wouldn't say that I don't watch a whole lot of video essays, because I definitely do, but
Okay, I thought you did, because you never heard of King K, so, like...
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of hard to respect your opinion. But, like, so many reviews on games that I watch, people will be, like, so hesitant to criticize anything, and I can't even blame them, because even if you're fair, if you criticize a game that people love, they will tear you apart for it for no reason.
And that's probably, like, a big fear of big reviewers, and why for big releases they'll generally rate it positively even if it's not all that great, because they want to be close to what people expect it to be and have people hold them in higher regard as, like, yes, this is what I believe too, so this review is okay, as opposed to, no, this isn't what I believe, therefore this review isn't okay.
Yeah, literally. And so, like, I was watching a Mario 64 review the other day, and it was like, bro didn't like the game, but he didn't want to say that, because he knows how people will react to it. So just like, oh, it's a game, it's got some sore spots, but it's still a classic. Like, he was dancing around it. I was like, man, it sucks that people can't just say what they want to say, because otherwise they'll get torn apart.
And I completely get that. I speak my full mind on, like, my Pokemon essays, for example, like, and that's why people tune into them and stuff like that, because it's these super long videos, like, delving into my full thoughts there. But for stuff that I'm taking, like, more casually and not really delving into, I completely get that, and, you know, I'm a little bit fearful of delving into things there. Like, one of the things I felt on the channel semi-recently is I feel like I've kind of come to the realization that the games that I most like playing on my channel are, like, kind of on the middle ground between super niche and unknown and something that is, like, super well-known and popular, like a nice middle ground. playing games that people are familiar with, but might not have played themselves, but, you know, are familiar with the series and what's going on with that. Like, playing Assassin's Creed Origins recently, for example, where it's like, everyone's familiar with Assassin's Creed, might not have played that game, let's tune in and see what's going on with it. Stuff like that. Those are the things that I most like playing. But, sometimes on this channel, I do eventually play games that people have been telling me for years are like some absolutely standout masterpiece, and I just have to play it myself. And one day, I do eventually get to playing it on the channel, and, like, slap it in the game queue and stuff. And something that I notice with, like, the games that people praise as masterpieces and love, and I'm playing for the first time, is, one, I get way more backseating than with any other game, and it's like, I'd rather just, like, experience it myself and play it myself. And two, there's a lot of expectations that they have on me for, like, he's finally playing this game that's like a masterpiece. He's gonna say that it's a masterpiece, especially considering how in-depth he goes with these other games. And there have been a couple games that, like, I'm not gonna name them because, like, that same fear, you know, of being torn out. But there have been a couple games that people have long told me are like masterpieces, must play. And I eventually get through them and play them through to the end. I'll think, okay, that was pretty alright, but it wasn't all that great. But, you know, have these expectations on my shoulders and, like, all these regulars that have been tuning in for a long time that have long been waiting for me to cover that game. And I don't want to, like, speak my full thoughts on it, you know, and my reviews during I always give, like, my review during the credits of a game at the end of the playthrough. I sometimes won't speak my full thoughts, just being like, yeah, surface level, it was pretty alrighty. I enjoyed the game, but yeah, I'm signing off now, bye! Without, like, really getting into things. That happened with a game semi-recently, and again, I'm not gonna name, but, like, that stance of, you know, saying that you weren't too fond of a game without really wanting to get into it. As much as I'd like to say I'm not that kind of person because I do these video essays where I delve into my full thoughts, there are some cases where I am, you know?
Yeah.
That's the case.
It's just not worth it all the time. But I'll tell you what, you better absolutely love every second of Metal Gear Solid, or I'm blocking you. No, just kidding.
Hey, sometimes there are games that people do tell me are masterpieces that I finally play, and I find out that they are actually really good. Like playing Persona 5 on the channel recently, I've been really liking it, actually. You know, I wouldn't say that's perfect, but I've actually been really liking that one. I haven't beaten it
like
yet.
23 times, god dang.
Yeah, it's
like every time I go on Twitch, Harmonia streaming Persona 5.
It's well, that's not because I love it. That's because it's a long game.
Yeah, it's wow. So you admit you don't love it? Nah, I'm just playing. I'm not Twitter.
Yeah, I think it is actually probably fair to say that I don't love. I haven't beaten it yet. Like maybe I'll love it by the end. I don't currently love it, but I think I really like it. It's pretty nice.
I don't think I love it yet either, but I feel the same way. I still really like it.
I haven't beaten it yet either.
No.
We're both getting into it for the first time with the release of it on the Switch.
Yep. Which is interesting. Unfortunately, you're ahead of me now, which is...
Sweet. I zoomed ahead. You were ahead of me for a while.
Yeah, I stopped playing it after I got sick. I don't know why. It's because I started playing Mario 64. Oh well. I'll catch back up. You can only play it on stream, so I have an advantage.
You'll be able to zoom on past. But yeah, so like that whole idea of not wanting to speak your full thoughts during a review. It couldn't be me during like a Pokemon essay. That's a whole appeal of like my Pokemon essays. But just like a casual game that I'm playing through that I don't plan on doing like a full dedicated review like that on. That the whole reason why I'm playing it is because of like all these people that have these expectations and said that it was a masterpiece, like in cases like that where that's the whole reason why I'm playing it and I want to see for myself. It's like, I don't know if I feel comfortable outing myself as like the one person that actually didn't really like that game so much. I mean, you know, there are also some cases where games that people praise and put up on some pedestal, I might end up getting like a bit of a worse experience than I would have gotten just playing it casually on my own, because of the increased degree of backseating I experience. But that could also potentially be like a factor that might create some bias in me. But
yeah,
of me being like, I don't like being backseated. this experience isn't as fun as it would otherwise be, and I'm like applying that mentally onto the game. That could also have an effect. I don't know.
That's true. Well, I'm glad I heard you say that. Now I'm gonna make a more conscious attempt not to backseat during Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, I like kind of.
In general, I try not to. I just try to like give you hints, like vague hints. But you know,
my general approach to backseating is like, if there's something that will be permanently missable, that like if I don't know about it, there's a chance that I could just like never run into it. It's like, yes, I'd love to hear about stuff like that, because you know, then I might be permanently miss it and then be upset, like, oh man, I didn't know about that one specific thing. Or if I'm stumped and getting frustrated, like, what the hell do I do? And someone lets me know, it's like, oh, thank you, yes. But if I'm just playing through casually, and like this was something that I experienced in Persona 5, for example, where I'm just playing through casually with like the personas that I get, and people will tell me like, oh, you should go to the Velvet Room right now and fuse these personas into this thing that's really strong, and I'm just like, I don't want to. I just want to keep on going through with what I'm currently doing. Or also with that game, there was like some mixed messages that I was getting from people about using DLC personas. There were some people telling me like, oh, don't use the DLC personas, they're way too strong. How, like, it'll ruin the gameplay experience, don't you dare use them. And some people being like, oh, the DLC personas are awesome, you should use them immediately. So have you decided to use the DLC personas yet? You should go do that. And stuff like that. I'm just like, please stop. Just let me play however I end up playing. You know,
to be honest, I'm a little surprised you decided to use the DLC personas since you're playing on, what is it? What is the difficulty?
Merciless.
Merciless, yeah, I'm a little surprised.
I never redeemed them from like the Persona thingamabob. They're just what I happened to fuse into. So.
Oh, okay. So
I didn't even realize they were DLC personas until I was using them for a while. People came in and were like, "Oh, you're using DLC personas." I was like, "Oh, I am? Okay." I guess I'm doing that now.
Well, that's completely fair game then. I don't know why they'd be mad.
So, you know, so there might be stuff like that, you know, talking about, you know, bias in review scores. Maybe some of the games that I've played on this channel that people have long said are masterpieces, maybe I'll get, like, not as positive of an impression as I would otherwise because of experiences like that diminish, like, my own play experience potentially, and that could be a potential bias in a review, you know?
That's true. And there is. I feel like some parts of this will be good to like for me to like go back to and watch, which is why I'm really glad you're recording this. I can just go back to and watch this and then like deconstruct it and really figure everything out.
For use in your own video essay projects there.
Yes, because originally I was going to put this little tangent about scoring in video games in my Sunshine review, which is the first game that I actually tried to score. And this started out as me just wanting to have a debate with someone about what I already thought and see if I'm like sound in my thoughts. And it ended up becoming a podcast. But yeah, I think we got stuff pretty well figured out.
Yeah,
I'm gonna come back and watch this video and
yeah, I think it's been
what I find in there.
Some interesting things to consider, and will definitely remain in the back of my mind as I continue to write the script for the Scarlet and Violet video essay.
All right, that's pretty much it for me.
But yeah, so I guess that's that in that case. We definitely covered a whole lot of ground and, you know, branched this off into a lot of related subjects as well. You know,
yeah, related. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. It was
yeah, this felt like 3 podcasts in one. It's pretty cool though. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I'd definitely be intrigued to continue to expand this podcast playlist of my channel some more with like delving into topics like this. I can definitely see where ventures like this goes.
I'm going to try to get Fermata to come on here so we can do a discussion on what makes a flaw in a video game. I'm gonna try.
That'd be interesting there.
I don't remember if you heard, but he's actually an employee at Infinity Ward.
Oh, neat.
People that make Call of Duty. So he might not be allowed.
So he's an expert on flaws then.
Wow. Hey, bruh. Chill. He might hear that and all of a sudden now he can't associate with us. But yeah, we gotta for sure do more of these.
Yeah, I'd definitely be intrigued to do so. And hey, maybe podcasts can end up being like an actual proper thing on my channel.
That'd be cool. We get, yeah, well, not
And then-
we, but you get like different guests. I'm trying to like sneak myself in there.
And then we can get like some almost video essay level depth without the amount of months of work that goes into a video essay.
Yeah, it's like it's a video essay, but you gotta kind of piece together everything.
Mhm.
Because I'm not gonna lie, we were talking about scores in like 20 minutes, and then we talk about it again at an hour and 50 minutes. It's a kind of spread out.
And then there was that whole tangent that we went on about the sexiest video game characters that I cut out. Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, that tangent that we went on, the two of us.
Yeah.
Definitely happened. And then Carvia joined the call and called us boosted. That was pretty messed up.
Oh yeah, that was pretty crazy. I can't believe that happened. It's a shame that all got cut out.
Yeah, that all got completely cut out. We should honestly ban him.
But yeah.
Alright.
Guess it's time to sign on out. So
hope you guys enjoyed Harmonia's first official podcast. I don't want to say first true. The first official dedicated podcast.
I mean, I've technically had an official dedicated podcast before with that Xenoblade 3 thing with Guzma that one time. And there was a thing that I did on X-Ray's channel rather than my own that's in the same playlist, but...
Oh, okay.
So there's two other instances, but the first as part of, maybe actually making this a proper thing.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, it's the first.
The first in potentially a series.
Yeah.
We'll say that.
Yeah, I'd be down to delve into like some other topics with stuff like this.
All right, you're gonna have to come up with some topics because I don't know how many I got. I got a couple for sure, but I don't know if it's gonna be enough to sustain a whole series.
I mean, I definitely have some topics in the back of my mind, and there's also things I've wanted to do video essays on, but I just don't have the time to do so. That this could be like a means to do like that, essentially cover the topics without doing a dedicated video essay, because time isn't infinite and editing takes so many hours. Yeah, we definitely covered a whole lot of ground when it came to this discussion. I think that it could be really cool to delve into some other subjects on podcasty kind of discussions like this and bring on some other nerds that might have some interesting things to say. Some other creators, some other people with their own experiences and all kinds of fun stuff there. And we'll see what happens. When the next thing of this will happen, who knows? We'll see. But yeah,
tomorrow.
Not tomorrow. But yeah, I appreciate you, proposing this idea of, debating this topic and coming on for, like, an actual content podcast with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been really fun.
It's been a good time. But yeah, thanks
it
all.
Ended up being more of a long-winded conversation than an actual podcast at some point, but
well, that's kind of what podcasts can be sometimes, right? I don't know.
I mean, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, thanks everyone who tuned into this, and until whatever the next time is, goodbye.
Yeah.